Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. I first noticed the sensation a week ago. It was subtle at first, a prickle at the back of my neck whenever I stepped out of my apartment. I chalked it up to nerves or a lingering unease from too many late nights spent watching crime documentaries. But as the days passed, the feeling became harder to ignore. There was always the faintest sound of footsteps, just far enough behind me to seem coincidental, but consistent enough to unsettle me. It wasn't just the footsteps. I began to spot the same car parked across from my building, its engine idling as I left for work. The same silhouette lingered at the corner of the coffee shop where I grabbed my morning lat. Even when I took detours, doubling back or changing my route, the presence remained. My rational mind argued that it was all a coincidence, but the growing weight in my chest told me otherwise. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the signs kept piling up. At the grocery store, I spotted someone watching me from the next aisle, their face partially obscured by a baseball cap. When I turned to leave, they seemed to vanish, but I could feel their gaze burning into my back. I convinced myself it was all in my head, even as I started locking my doors twice and checking every window before going to bed. One night, as I was heading home from work, I decided to test my theory. I took a route I never used, a long, winding path through quieter streets. The dim glow of streetlights cast long shadows, and my own footsteps echoed eerily in the stillness. Just as I turned a corner, I heard the faint crunch of gravel behind me. I stopped abruptly, and so did the sound. My heart pounded as I turned to look, but the street was empty. The moment I figured out I wasn't imagining things came 2 days later. I had been cautious, taking different routes and staying in crowded places whenever possible. That evening, as I stepped into my apartment, I noticed a slip of paper on the floor just inside the door. It wasn't there when I left. My stomach dropped as I picked it up. The note was simple: "I'm closer than you think." Panic surged through me as I searched the apartment, checking every room, every closet, every shadowed corner. Nothing was out of place, but the violation was undeniable. Someone had been inside. My hands trembled as I called the police, explaining the situation in a voice that felt foreign, detached. They arrived quickly, searched the apartment, and found no sign of forced entry. "It's probably just a prank," one officer said, though his tone lacked conviction. Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the pipes made my pulse race. I kept the lights on and a kitchen knife within reach, but neither brought any real comfort. When dawn finally broke, I felt more exhausted than ever, but I was determined to figure out who was behind this. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought a small camera and installed it discreetly near my door. If someone came back, I would have proof. For days, nothing happened. The camera recorded hours of empty hallways and passing neighbors. Just as I started to doubt myself again, the footage caught something. A figure, hooded and indistinct, approached my door late at night, crouched down and slipped something beneath it. The realization hit me like a freight train. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was targeting me. I took the footage to the police, who promised to increase patrols in the area but offered little else. "Or do you have any enemies?" they asked. I shook my head, though I wasn't sure. I couldn't think of anyone who would go to such lengths to unsettle me. But the question planted a seed of doubt. Was there someone I had wronged without realizing it? That evening, I decided to stay with a friend. I packed a small bag, locked up the apartment, and drove across town. It felt good to be somewhere safe, surrounded by familiar faces and warmth. My friend, Sarah, was understanding and tried to distract me with movies and conversation. For the first time in days, I started to relax, but my relief was short-lived. As I was settling in for the night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Running won't help," it read. My blood turned to ice. How did they know where I was? I showed Sarah, who immediately called the police again. They traced the number, but it led to a burner phone, a dead end. The officer on the phone advised me to stay vigilant and not to engage. The following day, I decided I couldn't keep living in fear. I started researching private investigators, hoping they could uncover something the police couldn't. I also made a point of staying in public places, never walking alone, and keeping my phone in hand at all times. The feeling of being watched never left, but I refused to let it control me. At least, that's what I told myself. It was on the third day at Sarah's place that they made their move. I was alone in the house, Sarah having gone to work. The afternoon was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels unnatural. I was in the kitchen when I heard the faint sound of a door creaking. My breath caught as I realized it was coming from the front of the house. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy skillet, and crept toward the noise. The front door was ajar. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, the skillet raised. Just as I reached the doorway, a shadow moved behind me. I spun around, but it was too late. A figure lunged, grabbing my arm and knocking the skillet to the floor. I struggled, kicking and screaming, but their grip was iron. Panic gave me strength, and I managed to twist free, stumbling into the living room. Before they could reach me again, the sound of sirens filled the air. Sarah had returned unexpectedly and seen the open door. She had called the police before coming inside. The figure bolted, disappearing out the back as the flashing lights arrived. The police swarmed the area but found no trace of them. Still, the encounter had left its mark. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews and sleepless nights. They increased patrols around both my apartment and Sarah's house, but no arrests were made. Whoever had been following me had vanished, leaving behind only fear and unanswered questions. The note, the texts, the break-in, it all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Story 2. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of knocking at my front door. It was steady and deliberate, the kind of knock that demanded attention. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, trying to convince myself it was just a dream. The sound came again, louder this time, echoing through the quiet house. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, checking the time, 2:47 a.m. The thought of someone being outside my door at this hour sent a chill down my spine. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, hoping whoever it was would leave. But curiosity, mixed with a nagging sense of dread, pushed me to investigate. Sliding out of bed, I tiptoed through the dark hallway, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. I approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. To my surprise, the porch was empty, bathed in the faint glow of the streetlight. No one was there, yet the knocking had been so clear, so real. I unlocked the door and opened it slightly, the cool night air brushing against my face. My eyes scanned the empty street, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I noticed the note on the ground, folded neatly and placed just outside the door. My breath hitched as I bent down to pick it up. The paper felt oddly heavy in my hand, the kind of weight that seemed to carry more than just words. I unfolded it, my pulse quickening as I read the message. It was written in bold, jagged handwriting. "I know what you did." My stomach churned, and a wave of unease washed over me. What could this mean? I stepped back inside, locking the door firmly behind me. My mind raced as I replayed the past few days, trying to decipher what the note could be referring to. Nothing came to mind, but the words carried an accusatory tone that was impossible to ignore. It felt personal, invasive, like someone had been watching me. I turned on every light in the house, hoping to chase away the creeping sense of dread. My living room, usually a space of comfort, now felt exposed as though unseen eyes were peering through the windows. I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows, my hands trembling with every turn of the latch. Sitting on the couch, I stared at the note, the words seared into my mind. The handwriting looked rushed, almost frantic, as if the writer had been in a hurry to leave it. I considered calling the police but hesitated, unsure of what I would even tell them. There was no immediate threat, just an unnerving message and an empty doorstep. As the hours dragged on, sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the house and rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, lurking in the shadows. The night stretched endlessly, and I found myself glancing at the clock every few minutes, counting down until dawn. When the first rays of sunlight seeped through the curtains, I felt a small sense of relief. The world seemed less menacing in the light of day, though the unease lingered like a shadow. I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, hoping to clear my mind and maybe find some explanation for the night's events. The streets were quiet, with only a few early risers out walking their dogs or jogging. I scanned the area, looking for anything unusual or out of place, but everything seemed normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, their gaze hidden behind a curtain or from the cover of a parked car. Returning home, I found myself drawn to the note again. I examined it more closely, searching for clues in the handwriting or the type of paper. It was plain and unremarkable, but the message itself felt heavy with intention. Whoever wrote it wanted to unsettle me, and they had succeeded. The rest of the day passed in a blur of distraction and paranoia. I jumped at every knock or ring of the doorbell, expecting to find another note or worse. By nightfall, I was exhausted but too afraid to sleep. The thought of another visit in the dead of night made my skin crawl. As the clock ticked past midnight, I sat in the living room, every light still on. The house was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I kept the note on the coffee table, my eyes darting to it every so often, as if it might reveal its secrets if I stared long enough. Then, just as I was beginning to relax, the knocking returned. It was softer this time, almost hesitant, but still distinct. My body tensed, every muscle coiled with fear. I stayed frozen in place, hoping whoever it was would leave if I didn't respond. The knocking continued, insistent but patient. Gathering my courage, I crept toward the door, clutching my phone tightly in one hand. I peered through the peephole again, my heart pounding in my chest. Once more the porch was empty, but something caught my eye. Another note, identical to the first, lay on the ground. I hesitated before opening the door, my hand trembling as I turned the lock. The night air was colder than before, carrying a faint metallic smell that made me uneasy. I grabbed the note quickly and shut the door, locking it again with shaking fingers. The message on this one was even more chilling. "This isn't over." Panic surged through me as I backed away from the door, clutching the note tightly. It felt like a warning, a promise of something worse to come. I dialed the police, my voice shaky as I explained what had happened. They assured me an officer would come by to check the area, but their calm tone did little to soothe my nerves. When the officer arrived, he searched the perimeter of the house and the surrounding streets but found nothing. He suggested it might be a prank, though his words lacked conviction. I could tell he thought there was more to it, but without any concrete evidence, there wasn't much he could do. That night, I barely slept, my mind replaying the events over and over. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped by fear and uncertainty. The next morning, I installed security cameras and motion-activated lights, desperate for some sense of control. But even with these measures, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Days turned into weeks, and while no more notes appeared, the unease never left me. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, my trust in the safety of my home shattered. Whoever had left those notes had succeeded in their mission to disturb me, leaving a lasting mark on my sense of security. Even now, as I sit in my brightly lit living room, I can't help but glance toward the door, half expecting another knock. The memory of that night lingers like a ghost, a reminder that sometimes the most chilling things are the ones that go unanswered. Story 3. The man in the white van had been parked outside my house for weeks, but I hadn't thought much of it at first. It wasn't uncommon for cars to park along the street, especially with the nearby construction site. Still, something about the way the van seemed to always be there, day or night, unsettled me. I told myself it was probably nothing, but the longer it stayed, the harder it became to ignore. One evening, as I closed the blinds in my living room, I noticed the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. They weren't moving, just sitting there, staring in the direction of my house. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized how often I had felt eyes on me lately. Shrugging it off, I locked the doors and tried to focus on my favorite TV show, though my unease lingered. The next day, I saw the van again when I stepped out to check the mail. This time, the man in the driver's seat was holding something up to his face, a camera. My heart sank as I realized he was taking pictures. My hands trembled as I quickly gathered the mail and rushed back inside. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but the feeling of being watched refused to fade. For days, I kept an eye on the van, and each time I saw it, my anxiety grew. I started drawing the curtains during the day and avoiding my windows altogether. It was hard to shake the sense of dread that had settled over me. My house, once a place of comfort, now felt like a cage. One evening, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher assured me they'd send someone to check it out. An hour later, a patrol car rolled down my street, and I watched from a crack in the curtains as the officer approached the van. After a brief conversation with the man inside, the van drove off. I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. The van returned the next day, parked in the same spot as if nothing had happened. I called the police again, but they told me the man hadn't been breaking any laws. Frustrated and scared, I realized I might have to take matters into my own hands. I began documenting every time I saw the van. I wrote down dates, times, and any details I could observe about the man inside. He was middle-aged, with short, dark hair and a blank expression that made my skin crawl. Sometimes I saw him with the camera, and other times he just sat there, motionless. One night, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "Nice pajamas." My blood ran cold as I looked down at my striped sleepwear. I hadn't posted any pictures of myself in these pajamas online, and the realization hit me like a freight train. He had been watching me through my windows. I barely slept that night, jumping at every sound and shadow. The next morning, I decided to install security cameras around my house. If the police couldn't do anything, at least I'd have evidence. Setting up the cameras gave me a small sense of control, but it didn't erase the fear that had taken root in my life. A few days later, the cameras captured footage of the man stepping out of the van and approaching my house. He lingered near my front porch, looking around as if checking for witnesses. Then he pulled out his camera and snapped several pictures before returning to the van. Watching the footage made my stomach churn, but I finally had proof of his actions. I brought the footage to the police, hoping it would be enough to get them to take action. They promised to look into it, but their tone was cautious, as if they didn't want to get my hopes up. I left the station feeling more vulnerable than ever. That night, I heard a noise outside, a soft scraping sound near my front door. My heart pounded as I crept to the window and peeked out. The man was standing there, staring directly at my door. I froze, unsure of what to do. When I reached for my phone to call the police, he suddenly turned and walked back to the van. The next morning, I found a note taped to my front door. It said, "I see you," written in shaky, uneven handwriting. My hands shook as I tore it down and threw it away. This was no longer just a man taking pictures, he was escalating, and I was terrified of what he might do next. I started staying with a friend across town, too afraid to sleep in my own home. I kept checking my security cameras remotely, and the van was still there, parked in its usual spot. It was as if he knew I wasn't there but wanted to remind me he wasn't going anywhere. One evening, while at my friend's house, I received another text from the same unknown number. It read, "You can't hide forever." Panic set in as I realized he might have followed me to my friend's place. I immediately called the police, explaining the situation in tears. This time they took me seriously. Officers were sent to my friend's house and to my neighborhood to look for the van. After an hour, they found it parked a few blocks away. The man was taken into custody and they searched the van, finding dozens of photographs of me, along with maps of my neighborhood. It turned out the man had a history of stalking and had been arrested before for similar behavior. Knowing he was off the streets brought me some relief, but the damage had already been done. I no longer felt safe in my own home, and the sense of being watched lingered like a shadow over my life. I moved to a new neighborhood a few weeks later, hoping for a fresh start. The experience had left me wary and hyper-vigilant, but I was determined not to let fear control me. Slowly, I began to rebuild my sense of security, though I knew I'd never forget the man in the white van. Story 4. It wasn't until I walked into the empty parking garage at 2 a.m. that I realized I wasn't alone. The air was damp, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered faintly, and my shoes echoed sharply against the concrete. As I approached my car, I became aware of a sound footsteps. They were distant at first, a soft rhythm that matched my own, but they grew louder and closer with each step I took. I stopped in my tracks and turned, scanning the vast expanse of dimly lit concrete and steel beams. The garage appeared deserted. My pulse quickened as I searched for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I shook my head, convincing myself it was just the sound of my own steps reverberating back at me. Resuming my pace, I walked briskly toward my car, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. The footsteps returned, louder now, and undeniably out of sync with mine. I spun around again, my eyes darting to every shadowed corner. Still no one was there. My breathing grew shallow and my fingers trembled as I tried to steady myself. I reached my car and fumbled with the key fob, my heart racing. As the headlights blinked in response, I caught a flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision. Whipping my head to the side, I saw nothing but the faint sway of a shadow near one of the support columns. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the lights above. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors and took a deep breath. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I stared through the windshield, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. Minutes passed, and the parking garage remained still. The footsteps had stopped, but my nerves were frayed. I started the engine, the roar of the motor filling the otherwise quiet space. As I shifted into reverse, I glanced in the rearview mirror. My blood ran cold. A figure stood several feet behind the car, partially obscured by the dim lighting. They were motionless, their face hidden in the shadows. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the gear into drive, my tires squealing as I sped toward the exit. The figure didn't follow, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My eyes darted between the road ahead and the mirrors, half expecting the figure to appear again. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts racing as I tried to make sense of what had happened. When I reached my apartment, I parked in the brightly lit lot and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. I leaned against it, my chest heaving as I tried to calm down. The events in the garage replayed in my mind, each detail growing more unsettling. Who had been there, and why hadn't they approached or spoken? Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the building and rustle of wind outside set my nerves on edge. I replayed the moment I saw the figure in the mirror, their stillness and silence more unnerving than if they'd chased after me. By morning, exhaustion weighed heavy, but the memory lingered. Over the next few days, I avoided the parking garage entirely, opting to park on the street, even if it meant walking farther. Yet the unease never left me. Each time I stepped outside after dark, I found myself looking over my shoulder, searching for any sign of the figure. It was as if they'd etched themselves into my consciousness, an invisible presence I couldn't escape. A week later, curiosity got the better of me. I returned to the garage during daylight, determined to prove to myself that it was just a trick of the light or my imagination. The space felt less menacing in the sun's glow, the shadows no longer holding the same weight. I walked to the spot where I'd seen the figure, searching for anything out of place. Near one of the support columns, I found something, a small, crumpled piece of paper. My stomach tightened as I picked it up, the edges frayed and the ink smeared. The message was brief but chilling: "You're not alone." My hands shook as I dropped the note and backed away, my breath catching in my throat. I ran to my car and drove home, my thoughts a chaotic swirl of fear and confusion. Someone had been there that night, and they'd left this message for me. But why? And how had they known I'd come back to find it? The questions circled endlessly, and no answers came. That night, I double-checked every lock in my apartment and kept the lights on. Sleep eluded me again, my mind racing with possibilities. Whoever had been in the garage clearly wanted me to know they'd been there, but their motives remained a mystery. The sense of being watched returned, a heavy weight pressing down on me. Over the following days, I noticed subtle changes in my routine. My sense of safety was gone, replaced by constant vigilance. Every stranger on the street seemed suspect, every sound in the night a potential threat. The paranoia was suffocating, and I began to question my own sanity. One evening, I came home to find a second note taped to my door. This one was typed, the words precise and cold: "I'll be seeing you." My legs nearly gave out beneath me as I tore the note down and scanned the area, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no one in sight, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I called the police, explaining the situation and showing them the notes. They promised to patrol the area and advised me to stay vigilant. Their reassurances did little to calm my nerves. Whoever was doing this was bold enough to come to my home, and the thought of them watching me was unbearable. Days turned into weeks, and the harassment stopped as suddenly as it had begun. Yet the fear lingered, a shadow that followed me everywhere. The parking garage became a symbol of my vulnerability, a reminder that safety was an illusion. I couldn't bring myself to return, even in broad daylight. The experience changed me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. I learned to trust my instincts, to be more aware of my surroundings, and to never take safety for granted. But the figure in the garage remained a mystery, their silent footsteps a haunting memory I could never quite shake. Story 5. It began subtly, almost too subtly to notice at first. A note appeared on my car windshield one morning, scrawled in neat handwriting. It simply read that they liked the color of my shirt. I laughed it off, thinking it was someone from work pulling a prank. By the end of the day, I had all but forgotten about it. The second note came a few days later, tucked into my mailbox. This one was different, mentioning how I always seemed to pick the same brand of coffee from the grocery store. It was oddly specific, but again, I brushed it aside. People were observant, it didn't mean anything sinister. Still, I felt a slight unease, a whisper of paranoia that I quickly buried. Then the messages started appearing on my phone. They were never threatening, just comments about things I had done that day. They mentioned how I jogged in the mornings, the exact time I left for work, and the fact that I always took the same route home. My friends laughed when I told them, chalking it up to someone having too much time on their hands. Their dismissal reassured me for a while. One night, I stayed late at work, the office eerily quiet as I finished up a project. By the time I left, the streets were empty, the cold air biting at my face. As I approached my car, I saw something under the wiper blade again. It was another note, this time commenting on how I seemed stressed lately. My heart sank and I looked around, but the parking lot was deserted. That night I struggled to sleep. Every creak of the house made me jump, and I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message. Morning came without incident, but I felt drained. I resolved to ignore the notes and messages, hoping they would stop if I didn't react. But deep down, I knew ignoring them wouldn't make them go away. Over the next week, the notes became more frequent. They appeared in places I thought were secure inside my gym locker, on my desk at work, even tucked into my coat pocket. Whoever it was, they were getting bolder. I stopped telling my friends about them, afraid they'd think I was overreacting. Instead, I started looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. One evening, I noticed a shadowy figure standing across the street from my house. They were too far away to make out any details, but I could feel their eyes on me. I pretended not to notice and closed the curtains, my heart pounding. The figure didn't approach, but I didn't sleep much that night, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The next morning, I called the police and explained what had been happening. They took my concerns seriously and said they'd patrol the area more frequently. While it gave me some comfort, I knew there wasn't much they could do without a clear threat or evidence. I installed a security camera outside my house, hoping it would deter whoever was watching me. For a few days, things seemed to quiet down. There were no notes, no messages, and no sign of anyone lingering near my house. I started to relax, convincing myself that maybe the camera had scared them off. But just as I began to feel safe again, it happened. It was late at night, and I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement outside my window. My stomach dropped as I turned to look. Standing there, barely illuminated by the streetlight, was a figure. They were close enough for me to see the outline of their face, though their features were obscured by the darkness. I froze, unable to move or breathe. For what felt like an eternity, we stared at each other through the glass. Then, as if realizing I had seen them, the figure stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. I scrambled out of bed and called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. When the officers arrived, they found no sign of anyone outside. The security camera had captured only a fleeting glimpse of movement, too blurry to identify the person. They reassured me they'd increase patrols, but their words felt hollow. Whoever it was had been watching me, and now they knew I was aware of them. I started changing my routines, taking different routes to work, and varying the times I left the house. I avoided going out alone, always looking over my shoulder. Despite my efforts, the unease never left me. Every shadow felt like a threat, every stranger a potential stalker. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. My blood ran cold as I sat up, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. Slowly, I turned my head and saw the figure again, closer this time. Their hand was pressed against the glass, their face partially visible. I grabbed my phone and called the police, whispering into the receiver as I watched the figure. They didn't move, just stood there, staring. When I heard the sound of sirens in the distance, they finally stepped back and disappeared into the night. By the time the officers arrived, they were gone. The police took my statement and promised to do everything they could, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Without clear evidence or a way to identify the person, their hands were tied. I felt trapped, a prisoner in my own home, constantly on edge. Days turned into weeks, and the sightings stopped. I hoped that whoever it was had moved on, though I doubted ever feel completely safe again. The experience had left a permanent mark, a lingering paranoia that followed me everywhere. I had learned to be vigilant, to trust my instincts, and to never take my safety for granted. Though the figure never returned, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching. Each time I passed a stranger on the street, I wondered if it was them. Every unfamiliar car parked near my house made my pulse quicken. The fear had become a part of me, a constant reminder of how fragile a sense of security could be. Story 6. I was home alone when I heard my front door open, and my heart sank. I knew no one else had a key. For a moment I froze in place, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe I hadn't locked it properly, or perhaps it was just the wind, but deep down I knew better. The soft creak of the hinges sent chills down my spine. I strained to hear any further sounds, holding my breath as the silence seemed to thicken. Slowly I tiptoed to the living room, clutching my phone tightly in one hand. The house was dimly lit, shadows dancing on the walls as I approached the front hallway. When I peeked around the corner, the door was ajar, swaying slightly as if mocking my fear. My heart hammered against my ribs as I debated whether to approach it. I stepped forward cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible. With a trembling hand, I reached out and pushed the door shut, locking it this time. The moment I turned away, I heard another sound of faint shuffle, like footsteps on carpet. My blood ran cold as I realized the noise wasn't coming from outside, but from inside the house. I spun around, scanning the room for any sign of movement, but everything appeared undisturbed. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking despite my effort to sound firm. The only response was the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My hands were clammy as I dialed 911, but before I could hit call, I hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if I was overreacting? Deciding to check the house, I grabbed the nearest thing that could serve as a weapon, a heavy lamp from the side table. The weight of it gave me a small sense of security as I moved through the rooms. I flipped on lights as I went, the brightness momentarily dispelling my fear. The living room and kitchen were empty, just as I had left them. I moved toward the hallway, the air feeling heavier with each step. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, even though I was sure I had left it closed. I swallowed hard and pushed it open, bracing for whatever might be inside. The room was empty, but the window was open, the curtains billowing in the cool night breeze. My pulse quickened as I crossed the room to shut it, my mind spinning with questions. Had someone climbed in through the window? If so, where were they now? I stood still, listening intently, and then I heard it again, a faint creak from the direction of the guest bedroom. The sound was so quiet it could have been my imagination, but I wasn't willing to take that chance. I stepped back into the hallway, my grip tightening on the lamp. As I approached the guest bedroom, the door creaked open slightly, as if inviting me in. My breathing was shallow, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my back. I nudged the door open with the lamp, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. The room was empty, just like the others. I felt a mix of relief and confusion as I stepped inside to check the closet. When I swung the door open, it revealed only a row of old coats and boxes. I let out a shaky breath, feeling foolish for scaring myself so much. Just as I was about to leave, a faint tapping sound echoed from the attic above me. My head snapped up, my fear reigniting with full force. I had forgotten about the attic, its entrance hidden in the ceiling of the hallway. The tapping grew louder, more deliberate, as if whoever was up there wanted me to know they were there. I backed away from the attic door, my mind screaming at me to leave the house. My phone was still in my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to dial. Instead, I stood frozen, staring at the attic as the tapping continued. It felt like an eternity before I finally found the courage to move. I ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock in my haste to get out. The moment I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, and I realized I was trembling. I turned to look back at the house, half expecting to see someone staring down at me from one of the windows, but there was nothing. I stood there for a moment, debating what to do next. I didn't want to call the police only to have them find nothing, but the idea of going back inside was unbearable. I decided to wait on the porch, my phone in hand, ready to call for help if I saw or heard anything else. Minutes passed, and the night remained eerily quiet. Just as I began to convince myself that I had imagined everything, a faint glow appeared in one of the upstairs windows. It was as if someone had turned on a flashlight, the beam moving slowly across the room. That was enough for me. I dialed 911, my fingers shaking as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that an officer was on the way and told me to stay outside until they arrived. I kept my eyes on the house, watching for any signs of movement. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly. I waited on the lawn, clutching my phone and trying to steady my breathing. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers came out and told me they hadn't found anyone. They checked the attic as well, but found no evidence that anyone had been there. The officer suggested that I might have left the window open or that the sounds could have been the house settling. I nodded, not wanting to argue, but I knew what I had heard. After the police left, I locked every door and window and stayed awake until dawn. The house felt different now, as if it were holding on to the memory of the night's events. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, even in the daylight. The next day, I decided to install security cameras around the house. I wanted proof in case anything like this happened again. As I reviewed the footage from that night, my heart nearly stopped. In one clip, the front door opened on its own, and a shadowy figure stepped inside. The figure moved through the house, stopping just outside the guest bedroom. Then it vanished, leaving no trace of its presence. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, unsure of what to do next. Story 7. It started with a notification on my laptop, an innocuous alert about storage space running low. Curious, I opened the file manager to investigate and found a folder I didn't recognize. Its name was a jumble of random characters, something I assumed was a glitch. Inside were dozens of video files, each time stamped and spanning the past month. At first, I thought it might have been some system error, maybe backup files from my home security system. But I didn't have a home security system. The first video was dated 4 weeks ago, at 2:17 a.m. I clicked it, expecting to see nothing more than a black screen or static. Instead, I saw the interior of my living room, dimly lit by the glow of the streetlight outside. The camera angle was perfect, positioned as if someone had carefully set it up. My heart began to race as I watched the video play. A figure stepped into the frame, moving silently, their face obscured by a hood. They walked with deliberate care, as if they knew the layout of my home. I paused the video and leaned back, trying to rationalize what I had just seen. Maybe it was some kind of prank, a joke orchestrated by a friend. But the thought didn't sit right with me. No one had access to my house, and no one would go to such lengths for a joke. I clicked on the next video, this one time-stamped 3 nights later. The same figure appeared, this time entering through the back door. They moved through the house, lingering in the kitchen, and then disappearing out of frame. Panic gripped me as I realized this wasn't a one-time event. Whoever this was had been in my house multiple times over the past month. I scanned the remaining videos, each one showing the same person entering and leaving my home. They never took anything, never disturbed anything. They simply wandered, as if observing, and then left. I felt sick. Someone had been invading my space, and I hadn't noticed a thing. I spent the rest of the night going through every corner of my house, checking locks, windows, and even the attic. Nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sleep was out of the question, so I stayed up staring at the screen and trying to figure out what to do next. By morning, I had decided to call the police. They needed to see the footage, and maybe they could help identify this person. The officer who came to my house was polite but skeptical. I showed him the videos, and his expression shifted from casual disinterest to something more serious. He asked if I had noticed anything unusual in the past month, missing items, strange noises, anything at all. I told him no, everything had seemed normal. He took a copy of the files and promised to look into it, but his parting words weren't reassuring. "Change your locks and stay vigilant," he said before leaving. I followed his advice, replacing every lock in the house and even installing a proper security system. For a few days I felt a little safer, convinced that the intrusions were over. But the sense of safety didn't last long. A week later, I found another folder on my laptop. This one was labeled with the current date. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were more videos, all from the past 3 days. The intruder had returned. This time the footage was different. The person spent more time in my bedroom, standing at the foot of my bed and staring at me as I slept. My blood ran cold as I watched them reach out, their hand hovering just above my face before they pulled back and left the room. I couldn't breathe. They had been inches away from me and I hadn't woken up. The thought was unbearable. I didn't bother calling the police this time. They had already told me there wasn't much they could do without identifying the person. Instead, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in that house another night, not knowing what might happen next. I checked into a hotel across town and spent the night staring at the door, jumping at every sound. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I bought additional security cameras and installed them around the house, making sure every entry point was covered. I also set up motion sensors and alarms, determined to catch this person if they tried to come back. For a while, it seemed like my efforts had paid off. Weeks passed with no new videos, no signs of the intruder. I started to believe it was over. But then, one night, I got an alert from one of the new cameras. The motion detector had been triggered in the living room. My heart pounded as I opened the app on my phone to view the live feed. The screen showed the same hooded figure, standing perfectly still in the center of the room. They seemed to be looking directly at the camera, though their face was still obscured. They raised a hand and waved slowly before turning and walking out of view. I called the police again, and this time they took the situation more seriously. Officers arrived within minutes and searched the house, but the intruder was gone. They found no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing to indicate how the person had gotten in or out. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The officers assured me they would increase patrols in the area, but their reassurances felt hollow. I stayed at the hotel again that night, unable to face the thought of being alone in the house. The next morning, I decided to hire a private investigator. If the police couldn't find this person, maybe someone else could. The investigator was thorough, combing through the footage and examining every inch of my house. He found a small device hidden under my desk, something he identified as a remote access tool. Whoever had placed it there had been using it to control my laptop and access the cameras. The discovery was both a relief and a new source of terror. At least now I knew how they had been watching me, but it also meant they had been inside my house long before the first video was recorded. The investigator removed the device and recommended I replace my laptop and upgrade my home's security system again. I followed his advice, sparing no expense to make my home as secure as possible. Months passed without incident, and I started to feel normal again. The fear lingered, but it became easier to push to the back of my mind. I even moved back into the house, convinced that the nightmare was finally over. But then, one evening, as I was settling in for the night, I noticed something on my desk. It was a small, black device, identical to the one the investigator had found before. My heart sank as I realized what it meant. They had been back, despite all my precautions. And this time they had left a message. Next to the device was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in neat block letters: "I am still here." Story 8. The motel was unassuming, the kind of place you stop at when you're too tired to keep driving but not expecting much. It had a faded neon sign and a gravel parking lot that crunched under my tires as I pulled in. I paid cash at the front desk, and the clerk handed me a key without much conversation. The room smelled faintly of mildew, but I didn't care. I just needed a few hours of rest before continuing my trip. I double-checked the door lock before lying down, the hum of the air conditioner lulling me to sleep. Outside, the parking lot was quiet, except for the occasional sound of tires on the highway in the distance. My car, parked just a few feet from my door, was packed with everything I needed for the trip. It was my lifeline, and I felt a small sense of relief knowing it was close by. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the silence. The air conditioner had turned off at some point during the night, and the room was stifling. I rubbed my eyes, still groggy, and reached for my phone on the nightstand. That's when I realized something felt off. The light streaming through the thin curtains was brighter than it should have been for that hour. I swung my legs over the bed and froze. My suitcase, which I had left neatly packed in the corner, was open, its contents scattered across the floor. My backpack, which had been sitting on the chair, was lying upside down near the door. Panic started to creep in as I looked around, trying to make sense of the mess. I could feel my pulse quicken as I rushed to the window. Pulling back the curtain, I looked out into the parking lot and felt my stomach drop. My car was gone. The spot where it had been parked was empty, and there were no signs of it anywhere. I threw open the door and stepped outside, scanning the lot for any clue of what might have happened. The gravel crunched under my bare feet as I took a few hesitant steps toward the space where my car should have been. The motel was eerily quiet, with no sign of other guests or staff. I walked back into the room, trying to calm the rising panic. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands trembling as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me an officer would be sent to the motel, but it would take some time given the remote location. I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to piece together the events of the night. I went through my scattered belongings, searching for anything that might have been taken. My wallet and phone were still there, but some smaller items were missing: a flashlight, a portable charger, and a few other things I couldn't immediately recall. It didn't make sense. Why would someone break into my room, take random items, and steal my car without waking me up? The officer arrived about 30 minutes later, his cruiser kicking up dust as it pulled into the lot. He was a middle-aged man with a tired expression, as though this wasn't the first strange call he dealt with that day. He listened patiently as I explained everything, taking notes and asking questions. He walked around the parking lot, checking for tire tracks or anything else that might point to where my car had gone. We found nothing. No broken glass, no signs of forced entry into the room, and no clues as to how someone could have pulled this off without making any noise. The officer suggested it might have been someone with a tow truck, given how quickly and quietly the car seemed to have disappeared. He promised to file a report and keep an eye out for my vehicle, but didn't seem optimistic. After he left, I sat back down on the bed, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. I tried calling the motel's front desk, but there was no answer. Frustrated, I decided to go to the office in person, hoping to get some answers. The clerk from the night before was gone, replaced by a woman who looked barely awake. She seemed genuinely surprised when I told her what had happened. She offered to check the security cameras, but her hesitation made me doubt there would be anything useful. Sure enough, when she brought up the footage, the angle of the cameras didn't cover the area where my car had been parked. All we could see was a faint shadow moving in the distance around 3 a.m., but it was too blurry to make out any details. I spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out my next steps. My car wasn't just transportation, it held everything I needed for the trip. I called my insurance company, explaining the situation and trying to stay calm as they walked me through the process of filing a claim. They told me it could take weeks to resolve, which didn't help my growing sense of dread. As the day wore on, I started to notice small details that made the whole situation even stranger. A few of the items scattered around the room didn't belong to me: a worn-out baseball cap, a half-empty water bottle, and a notebook with pages torn out. It was as if someone had been in the room after me, leaving behind traces of their presence. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I decided to pack up what little I had left and leave the motel. The clerk offered to call me a cab, and I accepted, not wanting to stay there any longer than necessary. As I waited outside for the cab to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced around the lot and the surrounding area, but there was no one in sight. The cab driver was friendly enough, but I barely registered the small talk as he drove me to the nearest town. My mind was racing, replaying the events of the night and trying to make sense of what had happened. I checked into another motel, this one slightly nicer and with better security, and spent the evening calling friends and family to let them know what had happened. By the time I finally lay down to sleep, exhaustion had taken over. But even as I closed my eyes, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled in my chest. Somewhere out there, someone had my car and my belongings. Worse, they had been in my room while I slept, and I had no idea who they were or what they wanted. Story 9. The delivery man who knocked on my door one evening had never seemed so familiar. His face carried a peculiar blend of friendliness and detachment, the kind you might expect from someone who had been doing the same job for years. As I took the package from his hands, the feeling nagged at me until I suddenly realized where I had seen him before. Just yesterday, he had been standing in my yard, watching. I froze for a moment, gripping the box tightly. My memory replayed the scene vividly, the way he stood near the edge of the lawn, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the house. I had thought he might be a neighbor or someone passing by, but now, with him standing so close, it felt sinister. He hadn't spoken a word then, just stared before disappearing down the street. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice breaking my thoughts. His tone was light, almost casual, but it didn't match the unease building inside me. I nodded quickly, mumbling a thank you, and closed the door before he could say anything else. My heart raced as I peered through the peephole, watching him linger on the porch for a few seconds before walking away. I set the package down on the kitchen table, but I couldn't focus on opening it. Instead, I grabbed my phone and pulled up the security camera app I'd installed months ago after a string of burglaries in the neighborhood. Sure enough, the footage from the previous day showed him standing in my yard for nearly 5 minutes. He wasn't delivering anything, just standing there, looking at the house. I replayed the video, hoping to find some explanation, but his behavior remained unnerving. Why hadn't I confronted him yesterday? Why had I dismissed it so easily? The questions swirled in my mind, and I decided I couldn't ignore them any longer. I saved the clip and debated whether to call the police. That night, sleep eluded me. Every sound in the house felt amplified: the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional rustle of wind against the windows. I kept glancing at the security feed, half expecting to see him standing there again. By the time morning arrived, I was exhausted but no closer to understanding his intentions. The next day, I decided to ask my neighbors if they'd seen anything unusual. Miss Grayson, who lived next door, frowned when I described the man. "I think I saw him a few days ago," she said. "He was walking up and down the street, but I assumed he was just delivering packages." Her words didn't reassure me. Delivery drivers didn't usually linger without a purpose. I spent the rest of the day on edge, checking the cameras every hour. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sense of unease refused to leave me. That evening, I heard a knock at the door. My stomach dropped as I approached cautiously, peeking through the peephole. It wasn't the delivery man, it was a different courier. I sighed with relief, but couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Over the next few days, I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe he had just been lost or taking a break. Yet, every time I thought about his face, the unease returned. I avoided online shopping for a while, hoping it would keep him away, but the memory of him standing in my yard haunted me. A week later, I came home to find a package sitting on my porch. I hadn't ordered anything. My heart sank as I picked it up and examined the label. It had my name and address, but no return information. I brought it inside hesitantly, debating whether to open it. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a knife and carefully cut the tape. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words scrawled in uneven handwriting: "I see you." My hands trembled as I dropped the box, the note fluttering to the floor. Panic set in as I locked all the doors and windows, checking them twice to be sure. Whoever had sent this knew where I lived, and they wanted me to know it. I called the police, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. An officer arrived within the hour, inspecting the note and asking me a series of questions. I showed him the security footage from the previous week, and he nodded grimly. "We'll keep an eye on the area," he said, though his words did little to calm me. That night I barely slept, jumping at every creak and shadow. At some point I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of movement outside. I bolted upright, grabbing my phone and pulling up the security feed. My blood ran cold as I saw him again, standing in the yard staring at the house. This time I didn't hesitate. I called 911, whispering into the phone as I described what I was seeing. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way, but the minutes felt like hours. The man didn't move, his silhouette eerily still against the glow of the streetlight. I watched, heart pounding, until the sound of approaching sirens made him turn and disappear into the darkness. The police searched the area but found no trace of him. They promised to increase patrols and advised me to stay vigilant. I didn't need their advice, I was already on high alert. Over the next few days, I installed additional cameras and motion-activated lights, desperate to feel some semblance of safety. Despite their efforts, the man didn't return. Weeks passed, and the tension began to fade, though I remained cautious. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching and waiting. Every time I stepped outside, I felt exposed, my eyes scanning the street for any sign of him. Months later, I moved to a new house in a different neighborhood, hoping to leave the fear behind. Yet even now, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's found me again. The memory of his face is etched in my mind, a reminder that sometimes the familiar can be the most terrifying of all. Story 10. I had always thought of my house as an ordinary, slightly outdated suburban home. The creaky floorboards and the occasional drafty window were just quirks of its age. It wasn't until I decided to clean out the basement one rainy Saturday that I discovered something I could never have imagined. While moving an old cabinet, I noticed a faint outline of a door on the far wall, concealed behind layers of peeling paint. Curiosity gripped me as I ran my fingers along the edges of the outline. The door was barely visible, blending seamlessly with the wall. After a bit of searching, I found a hidden latch cleverly disguised as part of the wood paneling. With a sharp tug, the door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow passage that seemed to extend into the depths of the house. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, armed with nothing but the flashlight on my phone. The air was stale and carried a faint metallic scent. The passage led to a small room, no bigger than a walk-in closet. The walls were lined with shelves, each cluttered with old boxes and random objects covered in layers of dust. In the center of the room was a wooden table with a stack of photographs neatly arranged on top. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I approached the table and picked up the first photo. The picture was of me sitting in my living room, reading a book. My heart raced as I shuffled through the stack. Each photo was of me, taken from various angles and at different times. Some were from moments I distinctly remembered, like the time I hosted a dinner party or when I was decorating the Christmas tree. Others were far more unsettling, capturing me in private moments, like brushing my teeth or lying in bed. The most disturbing photos were the ones taken while I was sleeping. The angle suggested the photographer had been standing in my bedroom, mere feet from my bed. My hands trembled as I stared at the images, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who had taken these photos, and why were they hidden in this secret room? I forced myself to keep looking through the rest of the stack, hoping to find some clue that would explain this horrifying discovery. Among the photos, I found a few scribbled notes, written in a shaky hand. The notes contained fragmented sentences mentioning my daily routines and habits. One read, "She goes to bed at 11, while another said, "Always leaves the back door unlocked." The realization hit me like a freight train. Someone had been watching me for a long time. My mind raced with questions as I backed out of the room, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I locked the hidden door behind me, as if that would somehow erase what I had just seen. I sat on the basement steps, trying to calm my breathing. The house, once a place of comfort and safety, now felt like a trap. Every creak and groan of the old wood sent a jolt of fear through me. I decided to call the police. When they arrived, I led them to the hidden room and showed them the photos and notes. The officers exchanged uneasy glances as they examined the evidence. They assured me they would launch an investigation, but their words did little to ease my growing paranoia. One officer suggested I stay with a friend or family member until they could determine if I was in immediate danger. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my house. I packed a bag and drove to my sister's place, telling her only that I had found something disturbing and needed a place to stay. She didn't press for details, sensing my unease. I lay awake on her couch, my mind replaying the images of those photos over and over again. The idea that someone had been inside my home, watching me, made my skin crawl. The following days were a blur of police interviews and security consultations. I had locks changed, cameras installed, and every inch of my house inspected. The police found no signs of forced entry, which only deepened the mystery. Whoever had taken those photos must have had access to my house for years. The thought was almost too much to bear. Weeks passed with no updates from the investigation. The police told me they were doing everything they could, but without fingerprints or other concrete evidence, their leads were limited. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Every time I entered a room, I checked the corners and windows. I even started sleeping with the lights on, hoping it would make me feel safer. One night, as I was reviewing footage from the newly installed security cameras, I noticed something odd. The camera in my living room captured a faint movement near the basement door. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a chill down my spine. I rewound the footage and played it again, this time pausing at the exact moment the movement occurred. It looked like the shadow of a person, but the image was too grainy to be certain. I called the police immediately and showed them the footage. They conducted another thorough search of the house, but once again they found nothing. The officers tried to reassure me, saying the shadow could have been caused by a passing car or a trick of the light. I wanted to believe them, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. The final straw came a few nights later. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a faint creak outside my bedroom door. My heart froze as I listened, straining to hear any other sounds. A moment later I heard it again, a soft, deliberate creak, as if someone was shifting their weight just outside the door. Summoning every ounce of courage, I grabbed my phone and called 911. The police arrived within minutes and searched the house from top to bottom. This time they found something. Hidden in the attic was a small makeshift bed, a collection of empty food wrappers, and a notebook. The notebook contained detailed entries about me, describing my routines, my habits, and even my conversations. The handwriting matched the notes I had found in the hidden room. The discovery confirmed my worst fear: someone had been living in my house. The police assured me that they would do everything in their power to catch the intruder, but the damage was already done. My sense of safety was shattered, and I couldn't bring myself to stay in the house any longer. I sold the house within a month, moving to a new city in the hope of leaving the nightmare behind. Even now in my new home, I find myself checking closets and locking doors multiple times a night. The experience has left me with an unshakable sense of vulnerability. Whoever had been watching me may be gone, but their presence lingers in my mind, a haunting reminder that some mysteries are better left undiscovered. Story 11. On 10. After hearing strange noises in the middle of the night, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was wrong. The sound of faint creaking and soft footsteps echoed through the house, waking me from my sleep. I lay there for a moment, straining to hear, but the noises stopped as quickly as they had started. My heart raced as I glanced at the clock. It was just past 2 a.m. The house was eerily silent now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I slowly pulled myself out of bed, trying to make as little noise as possible. The house was dark, and the air felt thick with tension. I moved quietly toward the hallway, listening for any sign of movement. The sounds from earlier had disappeared, but my instincts told me that I wasn't alone. Every step I took seemed louder than the last, the silence around me only amplifying the pounding of my heart. As I passed the living room, I glanced toward the security camera monitor that was plugged into the wall. It was the only thing that gave me a sense of security in the house, and I instinctively reached for the remote to pull up the footage. The small screen flickered to life, showing a series of images from the night. The timestamp showed that the strange noises I had heard coincided with movement inside the house, right outside the door of my bedroom. I froze in place, staring at the screen in disbelief. The footage was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. Someone had been inside my house. The figure, dressed in dark clothing, moved stealthily through the hallway, stopping briefly in front of my bedroom door. My blood ran cold as I watched them linger there for a moment before continuing down the hall. The fact that they had been so close to me, so close to my room, made my stomach turn. I rewound the footage to see when the person had entered. The timestamp revealed that they had entered the house just after I had gone to bed, moving through the front door without triggering the alarm. I had no idea how they had managed to bypass the security system, but I couldn't deny what I was seeing. The figure moved with purpose, as if they knew exactly where they were going, and their every step was calculated. They weren't there to steal anything, they were there for something else. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I watched them walk into the kitchen, rifling through drawers as if searching for something specific. I couldn't understand what they were looking for, but the longer I watched, the more disturbed I became. They moved in a way that felt almost methodical, as if they had done this before. My mind raced as I tried to piece together what was happening. How had they gotten in? Why were they in my house? And most importantly, what were they planning to do next? The figure spent what felt like hours in the house, moving from room to room, as if inspecting every corner. I couldn't make out any details about their appearance. Their face was obscured by a hood, and their movements were too quick for me to catch much. But there was one thing I could see clearly: the way they seemed to check the rooms, the way they walked right past the things that were clearly valuable, and the way they seemed focused only on one thing. It was as if they knew exactly what they were doing. I glanced back at the hallway, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows watching me. The house felt impossibly quiet, too quiet, as if it was holding its breath. My palms were sweaty as I pulled the blanket tightly around myself, unsure of what to do next. The idea that someone had been inside my home, so close to me, made me feel vulnerable in a way I had never felt before. The images on the screen seemed surreal, like something out of a nightmare, but I knew this was real. I quickly called the police, my hands trembling as I spoke to the dispatcher. I tried to explain what had happened, but the words seemed to get caught in my throat. The dispatcher assured me that an officer would be on their way immediately. I stayed on the line, my eyes fixed on the screen, watching the figure continue to move through the house. They seemed to be leaving now, heading toward the back door. The camera footage showed them slipping out of the house as silently as they had entered. By the time the police arrived, the house was still. I could hear the sirens approaching, their distant wail growing louder as they neared. I felt a sense of relief, but it was fleeting. The police combed through the house, checking every room, every closet, and every corner. They didn't find anything out of place, no sign of forced entry, no trace of the person who had been inside. It was as if they had vanished without a trace. I showed the officers the footage from the security cameras, and they reviewed it with a sense of disbelief. They asked if I knew anyone who might have had a key or access to the house, but I couldn't think of anyone. Well, the more we talked, the more I realized how vulnerable I had been. I had been in the next room, unaware that someone was moving through my home, and I had no idea how long they had been there or what they had intended. The police took the footage as evidence and assured me they would investigate further, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning, if this person would come back. As the officers left, I locked the doors and checked the windows again, double-checking every security measure I had in place. But despite all of that, I still couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, I barely slept, the events replaying in my mind over and over. The thought of someone being inside my house, moving around so close to me, made my skin crawl. I couldn't help but feel that the person who had been there wasn't just a thief. There was something more sinister about it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I just hoped that whatever it was, it wouldn't return. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Story 12. I had been getting strange phone calls for weeks. At first, they were just the usual wrong numbers, or so I thought. Each time I answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end, followed by a soft click. It became a pattern I couldn't explain, but after a while I convinced myself it was just some kind of prank, or maybe a glitch in the phone system. The calls continued though, each one coming at odd hours, usually in the dead of night. They always came from an unknown number, which made me uneasy. I tried blocking the number, but the calls kept coming, each one leaving a hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. It was as if whoever was calling knew I would answer, and they were waiting for me to pick up. One night I decided to stay awake, determined to get to the bottom of these strange calls. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, its screen lighting up with an unfamiliar number. My pulse quickened as I picked it up, hoping to catch the person on the other end. The moment I answered, I was met with silence, just like the others. Then, the whisper came. It was soft at first, like a breath against the receiver, but unmistakable. "I know what you did." The voice was barely audible, a low murmur that sent a chill down my spine. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, staring at the phone in disbelief. No one had ever spoken like that before. "I know what you did," the voice repeated, clearer this time, and my stomach twisted. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. What could they possibly know? There was nothing in my past that could explain this. Nothing that would warrant a phone call like this. Yet the voice sounded so certain, as if it had been watching me, following me. I pulled the phone away from my ear, feeling a wave of panic rise within me. The line went dead. I stared at the screen, the phone now silent, but the words lingered in my mind, echoing like a warning. Who was this? How did they know those words? My hands trembled as I set the phone down, trying to calm myself. It had to be a prank, right? But something about the voice made it feel far too real. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if it had been a dream. But when I glanced at the clock, I realized I had been awake the entire time. I had heard that whisper, and it was real. I tried to go about my day, distracting myself with work and errands, but the nagging feeling of being watched never left. That night, the phone rang again. I had been dreading it, knowing it was only a matter of time before the call started again. I picked up the phone hesitantly, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello," I said, my voice shaking. The whisper came again, sending a wave of terror through me. "You can't hide from me." The voice was closer this time, as if it were right next to me, breathing down my neck. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. The silence that followed felt suffocating, and I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I tried to speak, to ask who they were, but the words caught in my throat. Before I could gather myself, the voice spoke again, this time with a hint of amusement. "I know about the box." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced, searching for any connection, any meaning. What box? I had no idea what they were talking about. I had never kept any secret box. Nothing that could possibly relate to the voice on the phone. But the fact that it knew something so specific, something only I could know, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The line went dead once more, leaving me with nothing but the sound of my ragged breathing. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't stop myself from looking around the room, feeling as though someone was lurking just beyond my vision. The box. What box? I kept asking myself the same question, but the answer eluded me. I was certain I hadn't hidden anything of importance. But then I remembered. A long time ago, I had buried a small box in the backyard, a box containing old, forgotten memories. It was something I had done in my youth, something I had long since put out of my mind. The box held scraps of paper, trinkets, and other oddities, things that didn't mean much to anyone else, but to me, they were reminders of a different time, a different life. I hadn't thought about the box in years, not since I moved away from my childhood home. But now, with the voice on the phone mentioning it, I felt a deep sense of unease. How could anyone know about it? I had buried it in secret, far from anyone's reach. The only person who could have known was me, or so I thought. That night, I couldn't sleep. The whispers kept echoing in my mind, taunting me with their knowledge of something I had long forgotten. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the feeling of being watched. Finally, I decided to go outside to the backyard where the box was buried. My mind was made up. I needed to know what was happening, to understand how someone could know about something so buried in my past. The moon was high in the sky as I stepped outside, the cool air biting at my skin. I made my way to the spot where I had buried the box all those years ago, my hands trembling as I dug through the dirt. It didn't take long before I uncovered it, the small, rusted box gleaming in the moonlight. When I opened it, I was met with a single sheet of paper, a note that looked as if it had been placed there recently. I unfolded it, and my heart skipped a beat as I read the message scrawled across it, "I'm coming for you." The breath left my body, and I dropped the box in horror. It wasn't just a prank anymore. Whoever had been calling knew everything about the box, everything about me. And they were coming. And Story 13. I thought I was alone on the hiking trail, but then I heard a branch snap behind me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps that weren't mine. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, trying to listen for any sign of movement. The trail stretched out in front of me, a narrow path winding through dense trees, and there was no one else in sight. I had seen no other hikers when I set out earlier, and the silence around me felt too still, too unnatural. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a squirrel, but the footsteps sounded too deliberate, too heavy. I turned around slowly, scanning the trail behind me. The thick trees and underbrush blocked my view, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The wind rustled the leaves, but the footsteps had stopped. The sense of unease washed over me, but I dismissed it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I resumed walking, quickening my pace as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the trail. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. I wasn't far from the trailhead, so I told myself it was safe to continue. But the footsteps came again. This time they were closer, unmistakably behind me. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as the sound grew louder, matching my own pace. I stopped again, heart pounding in my chest, and waited. The footsteps halted as well, leaving me in the eerie silence once more. I debated turning around, but something held me back. A part of me wanted to confront whatever was following me, but the fear gnawing at my insides told me it was a bad idea. I was alone, and the last thing I wanted was to make myself an easy target. I pressed on, but my mind raced with every step, wondering who or what was lurking just out of sight. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a figure dart behind a tree. I couldn't make out any details, but it was unmistakably human. I stopped in my tracks, my pulse racing, and tried to peer into the shadows. The figure didn't move, but the sense of being followed grew even stronger. I turned back around, hoping to retrace my steps and head back to the trailhead. But the trail ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees closing in around me. I had taken the same path on the way in, but now it felt unfamiliar, like I had wandered into a place I didn't belong. I glanced over my shoulder, but the figure was gone. The sun was setting fast, and the woods were beginning to darken. I had been hiking for hours, and the thought of spending another night out here alone filled me with dread. I pushed forward, telling myself I just needed to make it back to the parking lot, where there would be other people. But the feeling of eyes on me never left. The footsteps came again, this time right behind me, as if whoever was following me had closed the distance. I spun around, but there was no one there. My breath came in short gasps, and my legs felt like they were made of lead. I was sure I wasn't imagining it anymore. Someone or something was stalking me through the woods. I took off at a run, my heart pounding in my chest, the sound of my footsteps mingling with the mysterious ones behind me. The trail seemed to stretch on forever, the trees closing in, making the path narrower and darker with every step. My mind raced with panic as I thought of every horror story I had ever heard about people getting lost or attacked on hiking trails. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps stopped. I dared a glance behind me but saw nothing. I slowed my pace, still trying to listen for any sign of movement. The silence was almost worse than the footsteps. It was as if the forest itself had gone still, holding its breath. I came to a clearing, the moonlight casting an eerie glow over the landscape. In the distance, I saw the outline of the trailhead. Relief flooded me, and I picked up my pace, desperate to get to safety. But as I approached the clearing, the sound of footsteps returned. Faster now, almost as if someone was closing in on me. I broke into a sprint, my breath ragged as I pushed my body to its limit. The clearing seemed to stretch farther away with each step, and the footsteps behind me were louder now, as if whoever was following me was right on my heels. I could feel the presence behind me, the heavy breathing, the weight of being pursued. Just as I reached the edge of the clearing, I heard a voice, low and guttural, whispering my name. I froze in terror, my heart stopping in my chest. There was no one in sight, but the voice was unmistakable. It was as if it had come from all around me, from the trees themselves. I didn't wait to find out who or what was behind me. I turned and ran toward the trailhead, ignoring the branches that whipped at my face and the rocks that threatened to trip me. The footsteps behind me grew louder, closer, but I refused to look back. The sound of my own footsteps and the rush of blood in my ears drowned out everything else. When I finally burst into the clearing where the trailhead was, I found myself gasping for breath. I looked around, expecting to see the figure, but there was no one there. The parking lot was empty, the only sound the rustling of the trees in the wind. I was alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been with me the entire time. I didn't stop to take in the surroundings. I jumped into my car, locked the doors, and sped out of the parking lot, my hands shaking on the wheel. As I drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. But the road behind was empty, just the dark woods stretching on, hiding whatever had been following me. It wasn't until I got home that I realized I had left my backpack at the trailhead. I never went back for it. Story 14. I thought I was just being cautious, locking every door and window before bed, until I found the back door ajar one morning with muddy footprints leading inside. The sight of the door hanging slightly open sent a wave of panic through me. I froze in place for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the door, wondering if I had forgotten to lock it the night before. But no, I always double-checked, or so I thought. I stepped cautiously toward the door, my hand trembling as I pushed it fully open. The air in the house felt different, stale, like it had been disturbed. The muddy footprints were unmistakable, leading from the back door and disappearing into the kitchen. My breath caught in my throat as I considered the implications. Someone had been inside while I slept, and they hadn't taken anything, at least not that I could immediately see. I walked slowly through the kitchen, my eyes scanning every corner for any sign of a struggle or disruption. The house appeared undisturbed, nothing out of place except for the trail of muddy prints. I knelt down to examine them more closely, my fingers brushing the damp ground. They were fresh, and the soles of the shoes that had left them were large, leaving deep imprints. Whoever had entered my home wasn't small. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I stood, my mind racing. How could this have happened? I was sure I had locked everything before going to bed. The house wasn't in a high-crime area, and I had always felt safe. The idea that someone had been in my home without my knowledge made my stomach churn. I wanted to call the police immediately, but a small part of me hesitated. What if I was overreacting? What if I had just forgotten to lock the door? But I couldn't ignore the evidence before me. The footprints were real, and they were recent. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and dialed the police. I explained the situation, my voice cracking as I told them about the open door and the muddy trail inside. They assured me they'd send an officer over right away, but it felt like an eternity before someone finally arrived. When the officer arrived, he took one look at the muddy prints and immediately started taking notes. "You're lucky you didn't walk in on them," he said, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. He asked if anything had been taken or disturbed, and I led him through the house, showing him the trail. "We'll need to take a closer look," he said, "but you did the right thing by calling us." I nodded, but my mind was racing. How had this person gotten in? I had checked the locks before bed, and the back door was sturdy. I hadn't heard anything during the night, no strange noises or creaks that would have alerted me to an intruder. The officer went through the house methodically, checking windows and doors, and even inspecting the locks. He found no signs of forced entry. It was as though the door had simply been opened from the inside. The officer finally asked if I had any enemies or if anyone knew I was alone. I shook my head. I didn't keep many friends in town, and I certainly didn't have any enemies. I lived a quiet, solitary life, keeping to myself for the most part. The officer seemed to consider this for a moment before suggesting that it might have been a random break-in, someone looking for an easy target. But the fact that nothing had been stolen made the theory hard to believe. Once the officer left, I was left with more questions than answers. Who had been in my house? What had they wanted? I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random break-in. There was something deliberate about the way the footprints had been left, as though the person had wanted me to find them. The thought sent a chill through me. Over the next few days, I kept the back door locked and checked every window and lock obsessively before bed. But the unease lingered. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind made me jump. I felt like I was being watched, but when I checked the house, I found nothing out of the ordinary. The feeling was always there, lurking in the background, a constant reminder that someone had been inside. I started noticing strange things around the house, objects that were slightly out of place, like a picture frame that had been moved just enough for me to notice. The feeling of being watched intensified. I even found a few more muddy footprints in the hallway, though they seemed to lead nowhere, as if the person had been walking in circles or had just vanished. One evening, after a long day at work, I came home to find the back door ajar once again. My heart stopped in my chest as I stood frozen in the doorway. This time the muddy footprints were even clearer, leading into the living room. I stepped inside cautiously, calling out for anyone who might be there, but there was no answer. The house was eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. I turned to look at the trail of prints, my mind spinning with fear and confusion. I followed them into the living room, and that's when I saw it on the coffee table was a small, handwritten note. My hand shook as I picked it up, my eyes scanning the words, "You didn't lock the door again." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Whoever had been inside my house had been watching me. They knew my routines, knew my fears. They had been waiting for me to slip up, and now they had left this message, as if daring me to keep going. The feeling of dread that washed over me was overwhelming. I dropped the note and backed away, my breath shallow as I reached for my phone. This time I wasn't going to hesitate. I called the police again, my voice trembling as I explained what had happened. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about the door. This was something far worse, something that felt personal, and I didn't know if I would ever feel safe again. Story 15. I knew the neighborhood well, but there was something unsettling about the man who moved in next door. His house had been vacant for months, and when the for sale sign was finally replaced with one that read sold, I had assumed it would just be another face in the crowd. However, when he arrived, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He was older than most of the residents, tall with graying hair and an unsettling stillness about him. At first, it was small things that caught my attention. I noticed him watching me through his window, even though I was just walking to my car, tending to the garden. He never waved or acknowledged me, but his eyes seemed to follow my every move. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that I was being paranoid, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Over the next few days, the strange behavior continued. I'd be in my kitchen, and I'd catch a glimpse of him standing by his window, his gaze fixed in my direction. Even when I wasn't outside, I felt like his presence loomed over me. It was as though he knew exactly when I was home, and it made my skin crawl. I would often look out my own window to see if he was watching, but his blinds would be drawn, as if he knew I was aware of him. I told myself it was just coincidence, that he was probably just adjusting to his new home and didn't have anyone else to talk to. But the longer it went on, the more unnerving it became. One evening I was sitting on my porch, reading a book when I saw him step out onto his front porch. He didn't look at me directly, but I felt his eyes on me nonetheless. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, as if waiting for something. I decided to go inside, my heart racing. The next day, I decided to confront him. I wasn't sure why, but I felt a sudden need to address the unease that had been building up inside me. I knocked on his door, trying to sound casual as I introduced myself. He answered quickly, almost too quickly, and smiled in a way that seemed forced. He introduced himself as Mr. Aldridge, and his handshake was firm, but his grip lingered just a moment too long. His eyes never left mine, and it was then that I realized how unsettling his gaze truly was. After our brief exchange, I left, feeling both relieved and more anxious than before. The smile he had given me stuck in my mind, but I pushed the thoughts away, deciding it was nothing. Over the following days, I made sure to keep myself busy, trying not to dwell on Mr. Aldridge's behavior. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became. His presence seemed to grow, as if he was always there, just out of sight, waiting for me to notice him again. One night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, feeling restless and uneasy. I looked out my window and froze. There, in the dark, I could make out the silhouette of Mr. Aldridge standing by his fence, facing my house. His posture was rigid, his hands at his sides, and he was staring directly at my window. I felt a cold chill run down my spine, and I quickly pulled the blinds shut. My heart raced, and I couldn't bring myself to look out again. The next morning I was determined to get to the bottom of this. I went for a walk, passing by Mr. Aldridge's house. As I approached, I saw him standing at his window, his eyes locked on me. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge me in any way, but his gaze never wavered. I quickened my pace, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. Things didn't improve after that. In fact, they got worse. I started hearing strange noises at night, soft tapping on my windows, faint rustling near my front door. I would get up to check, but there was never anyone there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was as if Mr. Aldridge had become a shadow in my life, lingering just out of sight, but always there. One afternoon, I decided to confront him again. I waited until he was outside, working in his yard. I approached cautiously, hoping to ask him directly why he was acting so strange. But when I spoke, he didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the ground, his movements slow and deliberate. It was as if I wasn't even there. I backed away slowly, unsure of what to make of his behavior. I couldn't tell if he was avoiding me on purpose, or if something else was going on. But I knew one thing for certain: whatever was happening, it was getting worse. I started noticing more things that didn't add up. The way he would disappear inside his house at odd times, the way he never seemed to leave, as if he was always there. Then, one evening, something happened that made me feel like I was losing my mind. I was sitting on my porch again, trying to enjoy the evening, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, expecting to see someone walking down the street, but there was no one there. The sound continued, growing closer, until I realized it was coming from Mr. Aldridge's house. I stood up and looked in his direction, and there he was standing at his window, watching me again. This time I didn't look away. I stared back at him, my pulse racing. I had to know if he would acknowledge me, if he would show any sign of recognizing that I had caught him in the act. But he didn't. He simply stood there, motionless, his eyes never leaving mine. And then, as if nothing had happened, he turned away and disappeared into the darkness of his house. I couldn't take it anymore. The unease, the constant feeling of being watched had become unbearable. I started making plans to move, but every time I thought about leaving, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Aldridge would still be there, waiting, watching. I couldn't escape him, no matter how far I went. In the end, I moved away, but the unsettling feeling never truly left. Every new place I went, I felt like someone was watching me, like I was being followed. I couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Aldridge had always been there, lingering just out of sight, waiting for me to notice. Story 16. I was taking a late-night walk when I noticed a figure standing in the distance, but as I got closer, I realized it was my own reflection in a broken window. The sight startled me and I paused, trying to steady my breath. The window, framed by an old, decaying house, had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. It was the kind of house that everyone in town avoided, rumored to be haunted or cursed in some way. I squinted at my reflection, the shattered glass distorting my features. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on the jagged edges of the window, making the broken glass seem almost alive. I couldn't help but feel a strange unease creeping up my spine, as if the reflection wasn't entirely mine. There was something off about it, something I couldn't put my finger on. I took a step closer, hoping to get a better look. My reflection seemed to shift, as though it was slightly out of sync with my movements. I paused again, unsure if I was seeing things. The night air felt colder, and the distant sounds of crickets and rustling leaves seemed to fade into a heavy silence. I raised my hand to touch the glass, and the reflection followed suit, but something was different. The hand in the window lingered for a moment longer than mine, as if it were waiting for something. My breath caught in my throat, and I instinctively stepped back, my heart racing. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the broken glass was playing tricks on me. But as I stepped back, I noticed something even more unsettling. The figure in the window didn't move. It stood perfectly still, staring at me with eyes that seemed too dark, too hollow. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I wasn't sure if I should run or stay, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The figure in the window didn't seem to notice my fear, or perhaps it thrived on it. Its posture was unnervingly rigid, and its shadowy form seemed to absorb the light around it. I swallowed hard, trying to calm my nerves, but the longer I stared, the more the figure seemed to take on a life of its own. It felt as though it was waiting for me to do something, anything. I slowly backed away, my eyes never leaving the reflection. It was as if I was caught in a trance, unable to look away from the eerie sight. The air grew heavier, and I could feel the weight of something unspoken hanging between us. I turned to leave, but before I could take another step, I heard a soft scraping sound, like fingernails on glass. I whipped my head back toward the window, but the figure was gone. The window was now completely empty, the shattered glass reflecting only the empty street behind me. I blinked in disbelief, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it all? Was I simply too tired, too alone in the night? I stepped closer to the window again, cautiously this time. The streetlights cast a dull glow, illuminating the shards of glass that littered the ground below. I leaned forward, peering into the dark interior of the house. It was impossible to see anything inside, just shadows and the faint outline of decaying furniture. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper. It was soft at first, like the wind rustling through the trees, but then it grew clearer. It sounded like my name, whispered in a voice that wasn't my own. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whisper came again, closer this time, and it sent a wave of dread crashing over me. I took a step back, my breath quickening. I didn't know what to do. The whispering continued, but I couldn't pinpoint where it was coming from. I felt like I was being drawn in, like something was trying to pull me closer to the house. But every instinct in me screamed to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. I turned around and began walking away, my footsteps quick and uneven. But as I reached the end of the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The whispering had stopped, but the weight of the silence pressed down on me. I quickened my pace, eager to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the old house. Just as I rounded the corner, I dared to glance back. The house was still there, looming in the darkness. But this time, the window was different. It wasn't empty. There, in the broken glass, was my reflection again, only it wasn't quite right. The figure from before was back, but now it was smiling. My blood ran cold as I stared at the distorted version of myself in the window. It wasn't my smile, it was too wide, too knowing. The eyes were darker, deeper, as though they could see right through me. I turned away quickly, my mind racing, but the image of that twisted reflection stayed with me. I didn't stop running until I reached my house, my heart pounding in my chest. I locked the door behind me and stood there, panting, trying to shake the feeling that something was following me. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a broken window reflecting my tired mind. But deep down, I knew something had changed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure in the window, smiling at me from the darkness. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, that the house had been empty for years, but the fear lingered. I couldn't forget the way the reflection had moved on its own, how it seemed to reach out to me. The next morning, I returned to the house. I needed answers, needed to know if I had truly seen what I thought I had. But when I arrived, the house was just as abandoned as it had always been. The window was still broken, but there was no reflection, just the dark emptiness of the house. I stood there for a long time, staring at the window, wondering if I had been foolish to believe what I had seen. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining things. Something had been in that window, and whatever it wasn't done with me yet. Story 17. I arrived at my friend's house on Friday evening, excited for the weekend getaway. It was the perfect escape from the usual grind, peaceful, with nothing but the hum of crickets outside and the warmth of a cozy cabin. My friend Sarah had invited me over for a couple of days to relax, and I was eager to catch up. After a long week, I was ready for some quiet time in the countryside, away from work and the chaos of the city. The evening went smoothly. We spent the night watching movies, chatting, and enjoying the comfort of the house. By the time we headed to bed, I was more than ready for a good night's sleep. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside, and after a light breakfast, I decided it was time to take a shower and freshen up before we spent the day hiking in the woods nearby. I grabbed my toiletries and walked to the bathroom, ready for a hot shower. As I opened the door, I noticed something strange. A towel was hanging on the towel rack, but it wasn't mine. I frowned, wondering if Sarah had left it there for me, but then I realized it didn't look familiar at all. It was a dark green towel, slightly faded, with an intricate pattern that I didn't recognize. My own towel was a plain white one, which I had left on the bathroom counter. I thought nothing of it at first, assuming Sarah might have had a guest over recently or simply mixed up the towels. But then, as I stepped into the bathroom, I noticed something even more unsettling: a set of muddy footprints on the floor. They weren't large, but they were unmistakable fresh prints leading directly to the bathroom door. My heart skipped a beat as I scanned the room, realizing that no one else had been there since I arrived. I quickly turned around, my mind racing. The prints were not mine. I had only just arrived, and Sarah hadn't mentioned anyone else coming by. I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The footprints were too fresh, the mud still clinging to the soles of the shoes. They looked like they had been left just moments before, leading right up to the bathroom door, as if someone had been standing there, waiting for me to walk in. I stepped back out of the bathroom and called for Sarah. She was in the kitchen, making coffee, completely unaware of what I had found. I told her about the towel and the footprints, trying to sound casual, but I could tell from the look on her face that she was just as confused as I was. She hadn't seen anyone else around the house, and she assured me that the towel was definitely not hers either. She said she hadn't had any visitors, and no one had been in the bathroom except for me. My mind began to race. Could someone have broken in? The thought seemed ridiculous, but the more I thought about it, the less I could shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Sarah's house was remote, far from the nearest town, and the idea that someone could be lurking around seemed too chilling to ignore. We both checked the windows and doors, but everything seemed secure. There were no signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been inside except for the odd footprints. The rest of the day passed in a blur of uneasy glances and awkward silences. We went on our hike, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle in the trees, every snap of a twig beneath my feet made me jump. Sarah noticed my discomfort and asked if I was okay, but I didn't want to scare her. I told her I was just tired from the long drive and needed some fresh air, but inside, I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints. That night, after dinner, I excused myself to take another shower, still unsettled by the morning's discovery. As I entered the bathroom, I hesitated, half expecting to see the same muddy footprints again. To my relief, the floor was clear. There were no signs of anyone having been there since I last checked. I locked the door behind me, determined to put the strange incident out of my mind. However, as I stood in the shower, I heard something. It was faint, but it was there, a soft sound, like someone tapping lightly on the bathroom door. I froze, holding my breath. I couldn't be sure, but it almost sounded like someone was standing outside, just waiting for me to notice. I quickly turned off the water, wrapped a towel around myself, and cautiously opened the door. No one was there. I checked the rest of the house, but everything seemed normal. Sarah was in the living room, watching TV, completely unaware of what had just happened. I didn't mention the noise to her, not wanting to add to the tension. Instead, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was off. The next morning, we decided to leave the house early and go into town. I was eager to get away from the unsettling atmosphere of the weekend. As we packed up, I couldn't help but glance at the bathroom door one last time. The towel was gone now, but the memory of the footprints still lingered in my mind. We left the house without saying much more about the strange occurrences. Sarah continued to act as if everything was normal, but I could tell she was a little shaken too. Neither of us had any answers, and the whole weekend felt like it had been overshadowed by the feeling that something or someone was watching us. To this day, I still wonder about that weekend. I never found out who had left the footprints or why the towel had been in the bathroom. I've never been able to shake the eerie feeling that someone was there, just out of sight, watching my every move. And every time I visit Sarah now, I can't help but glance nervously at the bathroom door, half expecting to see those same muddy prints waiting for me. Story 18. For months, I had been using a rideshare app to get around town. It was convenient, affordable, and reliable, and I quickly got used to the idea of hopping into different cars with drivers who always seemed friendly enough. Most of the time, I didn't even think about who was behind the wheel, as long as they got me to my destination safely. But one driver stood out from the rest, not because of anything unusual about the ride itself, but because of the strange way he acted. It started with the first ride. The app showed me the usual details: car model, driver's name, and rating. When the car pulled up, I didn't think much of it, but the moment I got inside, the driver greeted me with an overly familiar smile. "You look familiar," he said, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. I'm pretty sure I've driven you before." I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I had taken his ride before and simply forgotten. But as the days passed, the same driver started picking me up more and more frequently. Each time he would greet me with that same knowing smile and tell me he recognized me. "I swear we've met before," he would say. "Maybe at a party or a concert. You just look so familiar." Each time I smiled politely and nodded, brushing off the comment. I didn't remember ever meeting him before, but I wasn't about to argue. I didn't think much of it after all. He was just trying to be friendly. The strange part came when it didn't stop. It wasn't just 1 or 2 rides. It was every single ride with him. He would insist that we had met before, even after I told him that I didn't remember him. "You sure? You really look like someone I know," he would say, his tone starting to sound more like he was convinced of it. I started to feel uneasy, but I didn't want to be rude, so I continued to nod and agree with him. But inside, I was starting to wonder why this was happening. The situation grew more bizarre when, one day, I got into the car and he didn't say anything at first. He just stared at me in the rearview mirror, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. I could feel the tension building in the car, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. "You're sure we haven't met?" he asked again, but this time there was a strange edge to his voice. I shook my head, trying to remain calm. "I don't think so," I replied, though I could feel my heart start to race. That night, after the ride ended, I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something about the way he looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. I decided to check the app, wondering if there was anything in his profile that could explain his odd behavior. But there was nothing out of the ordinary, just a typical driver profile with a decent rating and no negative comments. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the next time I used the app, I found that he was the one assigned to pick me up again. This time I decided to ask him outright. "Why do you keep saying you recognize me?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He looked at me through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he said slowly, almost as if he was choosing his words carefully. "I just feel like I've seen you before. Maybe you're someone I knew from a long time ago. Or maybe it's just a feeling." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. I had no idea what he was getting at, but I was starting to feel like something wasn't right. It didn't help that the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that I had never seen him before in my life. I had never been to a party or concert where he could have been, and I couldn't think of a single place where our paths might have crossed. His face was unfamiliar to me, and yet he seemed so convinced that we had met. It was as though he was planting memories in my mind, making me question whether I was just forgetting something. The next few rides with him were even stranger. He would make small talk, but it was always laced with these strange comments about how familiar I seemed to him. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he would say, or "I could have sworn we were in the same place before." Each time I grew more uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to handle the situation. He was just a driver after all. What could I do? Then, one night I had had enough. I couldn't take the constant feeling that something was off, so I decided to confront him directly. "Look," I said as I got into the car, "I don't know who you think I am, but I'm not someone you've met before. I've never seen you before in my life." For a moment he was silent, and I could see his reflection in the mirror, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're sure about that?" he asked, his voice low and almost too calm. I nodded firmly, feeling my pulse quicken. "Yes," I said, "I'm sure." For the rest of the ride he was quiet. I could feel the tension in the air, but he didn't say anything else about recognizing me. When I arrived at my destination, I got out of the car quickly, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. I didn't want to take another ride with him, but the next time I opened the app, his name popped up as the driver again. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to cancel the ride. I didn't want to deal with it anymore. But the next day, the same thing happened. I was assigned to him again. It was as if I had no choice but to ride with him, and I felt trapped. I was starting to wonder if I was just imagining things or if there was something more sinister going on. But one thing was clear: I didn't feel safe anymore. I haven't used the rideshare app since. I don't know what it was about that driver, but I can't shake the feeling that he knew something about me that I didn't. Maybe I'll never know the truth, but for now I'm avoiding the app altogether. There are some things that are better left unexplained. Story 19. I woke up to the sound of my front door opening at 3 a.m. A soft creak that sent a jolt of panic through me. The house was eerily quiet, save for the noise which seemed out of place at that hour. I lay still for a moment listening, but the sound didn't repeat. I strained my ears for any sign of movement, but nothing came. I reluctantly climbed out of bed, my heart pounding as I approached the door. The house felt unusually cold, and I felt a sense of dread creeping over me. As I reached for the doorknob, I felt a chill in the air, almost as if someone had just passed by. When I turned the handle, I found the door locked, just as I had left it before going to bed. No one was there. I checked the locks on all the windows and doors, ensuring everything was secure. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but there was no obvious sign that anyone had entered. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe it was the wind, or perhaps I had imagined the sound. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I returned to the living room, trying to calm my nerves. But the silence of the house only made me more uneasy. I sat down on the couch, trying to steady my breathing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was then that my phone rang, the screen displaying no caller ID. My heart skipped a beat. Who could be calling me at this hour with no ID? Hesitant, I picked up the phone, bringing it to my ear. The line was silent at first, but I could hear a faint breathing sound on the other end, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, unsure of what to do. It felt like someone was waiting for me to speak first. "Hello," I said, my voice shaky as I tried to sound calm. The breathing continued, growing heavier, but no words came through. I waited, listening to the eerie sounds on the other end, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for some sort of response, but there was nothing. Just the sound of shallow breaths. I ended the call, but the ringing continued. It was as if the phone was calling itself. I stared at the screen, unable to move, as the phone rang once more. This time the breath on the other end was louder, more forceful, as if whoever was calling had been waiting for me to pick up again. I quickly hung up, my hands trembling. My mind raced with possibilities. Could it have been a prank? Maybe someone had gotten hold of my number and decided to mess with me. But why would they call in the middle of the night? And why the strange breathing? The more I thought about it, the less logical it seemed. My pulse quickened as I glanced around the dark room, feeling the weight of the silence pressing in on me. I checked the caller ID again, but there was nothing. No number, no name, just the words "No caller Idaho" flashing on the screen. I felt a sudden sense of isolation, as if the world outside had disappeared. The quiet seemed suffocating, and I realized that I hadn't heard a single sound from the street outside. Not a car passing by, not a dog barking in the distance, nothing. I paced around the house, checking the doors and windows again, making sure everything was secure. My nerves were on edge, and every little noise made me jump. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. The call had shaken me, but the feeling of being watched was worse. I sat down on the couch again, trying to collect my thoughts. My phone rang once more. This time the number was blocked, and I hesitated before answering. The breathing was louder this time, and I could almost hear a faint whisper between the breaths. It was so soft I could barely make it out, but it sounded like my name. "Why are you here?" I whispered to myself, barely believing what I had just heard. I ended the call again, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My phone screen flickered for a moment as if it were malfunctioning, and then went dark. I checked the time. It was almost 3:30 a.m. The eerie feeling of being watched intensified. I had no idea who could be calling me, but the thought of someone being so close to my home, so intent on reaching me, made my skin crawl. I turned off my phone and set it down on the coffee table, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I felt exposed, as if I were being hunted. The strange breathing on the phone had left an unsettling impression on me. It wasn't just the call, it was the fact that it had come after the noise I'd heard at the door. I grabbed my keys and went outside, checking the yard and the street for any sign of movement. The cold night air hit my face, and I wrapped my arms around myself for warmth. The street was completely still. No lights on in the houses, no cars driving by. Just an overwhelming silence. I felt like I was standing in the middle of an empty world, cut off from everything. After a few minutes, I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I sat down again, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The phone calls, the strange breathing, the feeling of being watched, it all felt connected, but I couldn't figure out how. My phone sat silently on the table, its screen still dark. I glanced at the clock. 3:45 a.m. I couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows moving in the corners of my vision. I knew something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Whoever had been calling me was still out there, waiting for me to make the next move. I sat in silence, the weight of the night pressing down on me. Something told me that I wasn't alone anymore. Story 20. I walked into my apartment after a long day, expecting the familiar stillness that greeted me each evening. But something felt off the moment I stepped through the door. The air seemed heavier, the silence more pronounced. My eyes immediately went to the hallway table, where I always left my keys. But they weren't there. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to think. I turned my head to the kitchen counter, and there they were, my keys, placed neatly in the center, as though someone had deliberately placed them there. Confusion crept into my mind as I slowly walked further into the apartment. The layout was exactly the same, but something felt wrong, like the entire space had shifted without my permission. The couch, which I always kept near the window, was now pushed against the far wall. The coffee table that had been in front of it was now in the middle of the room, in a position that made no sense. My bookshelf was moved too, slightly askew, as if someone had taken the time to rearrange it. My heart began to race as the realization hit me I hadn't been the one to do this. I tried to brush it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I had just been too tired to notice the subtle changes, or perhaps I had absent-mindedly moved things around earlier. But as I moved through the apartment, the feeling of unease grew. The chair in the dining room was now facing the wall, an odd choice for something meant to face the table. I stepped into the bedroom and saw that the bed was made in a way I didn't recognize, the pillows stacked differently. It was as though someone had been here, someone who knew exactly how to make small changes without drawing attention to them. My thoughts raced, and I could feel my pulse quicken. I had been at work all day, and no one else had a key to my apartment. The only people who had access were a couple of close friends, but none of them would have come in without telling me first. I checked the door lock again, confirming it was still intact, and the window was locked as well. Nothing appeared to be out of place on the surface, yet the strange feeling lingered. Had I forgotten something? Maybe I had asked one of my friends to come by and I had just forgotten about it. But that didn't seem right. I could feel my stomach nodding as I recalled my last few days. I hadn't made any plans for anyone to visit, and no one had called to let me know they were stopping by. My phone was still in my pocket, but I didn't see any missed calls or messages. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but the anxiety was starting to build. There had to be a logical explanation for this. I grabbed my phone and dialed my best friend's number. The ringing on the other end felt louder than usual, as though I were waiting for a lifeline to pull me from this unsettling moment. When they picked up, I asked if they had been by the apartment today, maybe to grab something or check in on me. The response was swift and immediate: "No, I haven't been over." The sudden relief that flooded my chest was short-lived, replaced quickly by a sinking feeling. If it wasn't them, then who? I tried to reason with myself. Maybe I was just paranoid, maybe the stress from work had made me more sensitive to small details. But as I walked back into the living room, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. A small piece of paper was tucked under the edge of the coffee table, just barely visible. I knelt down and pulled it out, unfolding it carefully. It was a simple note, written in block letters, and it read, "I'm watching you." My blood ran cold, and my mind immediately began to spiral. Who had been in here? And more importantly, why? I could feel my hands shaking as I stared at the note, my thoughts racing in every direction. It didn't make sense. Why would someone leave a note like that? Was this a prank, or something more sinister? I looked around the apartment again, my gaze darting from corner to corner, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But the apartment was still, eerily so, with only the soft hum of the refrigerator breaking the silence. I grabbed my phone again, this time dialing the number for the building's security. I explained what had happened, my voice shaky as I recounted finding the furniture moved and the note. The security guard on the other end assured me that someone would come by to check things out, but that didn't ease my growing sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me for longer than I realized. The thought made my skin crawl, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder as if expecting someone to appear behind me. I sat down on the couch, my mind racing. I tried to think back to any strange encounters I might have had recently, any interactions that felt off, any moments when I might have felt like I was being followed or watched. But nothing stood out. Everything had seemed normal. I had even made it a point to lock up properly whenever I left the apartment. Yet here I was, in the middle of an apartment that felt like it had been violated, with no clear explanation. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for the security guard to arrive. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the words on the screen blurred together as my mind kept returning to the strange events of the day. I glanced back at the kitchen counter where my keys had been placed, the simple act of their relocation feeling like an eerie message in itself. The silence in the apartment was oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, there was a knock at the door. My heart leaped in my chest as I rushed to answer it, half expecting to find someone standing there with an explanation. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. I stepped outside, my eyes scanning the hallway, but it was empty. The security guard had never shown up. The silence seemed even heavier now, and the sense of unease that had settled over me was impossible to ignore. I closed the door behind me, locking it once more. My mind was racing, but I couldn't think of anything that made sense. I sat back down on the couch, staring at the door, wondering if someone was still out there, watching me. Story 21. I had always thought of my apartment building as quiet and uneventful. I kept to myself, and most of my neighbors did the same. It was a small, older building, the kind that had a worn charm to it, with creaky floors and peeling paint. I didn't expect much interaction with anyone. The building was mostly occupied by people who had lived there for years, and the atmosphere was always calm until one evening when everything changed. It was late when I decided to do laundry. I had a busy week ahead, and I needed clean clothes for work. The laundry room was located in the basement, and I always made sure to go down there late at night when no one else was around. It gave me a sense of privacy and peace. As I descended the stairs, I noticed that the lights in the laundry room flickered more than usual, but I shrugged it off. It wasn't unusual for the building to have electrical issues. When I opened the door to the laundry room, I immediately noticed something odd. A piece of clothing was lying on the floor near the washer, a faded blue hoodie. I knew it wasn't mine. Mine were all neatly folded in my apartment. The hoodie looked out of place, like it had been dropped carelessly. At first, I thought maybe someone had forgotten it, but there was something about it that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just the fact that it wasn't mine, it was the way it was just left there, abandoned. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should leave and come back later. But curiosity got the best of me. I picked up the hoodie, feeling its weight in my hands. It was soft, worn in a way that made it seem familiar, like it had been used often. But it wasn't a brand I recognized, and I couldn't think of anyone in the building who would wear something like it. As I inspected it further, I noticed something else. A small piece of paper was tucked into one of the pockets. My heart skipped a beat when I unfolded the paper. It was a note written in messy handwriting. The ink was smudged in places, as though it had been hurriedly scribbled down. My name was written on it, my full name, in big, bold letters. I stared at it for a moment, the words not making sense at first. "I'm always watching you," the note said. "You're never alone." My mind raced as I read the words over and over. The feeling of unease grew stronger with each passing second. I looked around the laundry room, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was just the usual laundry equipment, washers, dryers, detergent bottles. But now it felt different. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. The thought that someone else had been in the room with me, someone who knew my name, sent a chill down my spine. I quickly stuffed the note back into the hoodie pocket and glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing in the doorway. But there was nothing, just the empty, dimly lit room. I grabbed my laundry and rushed back to my apartment, my mind spinning with questions. Who had left the hoodie? Who knew my name? The building wasn't big, and I had always thought I was alone in it, but now I wasn't so sure. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had been in the laundry room before me and had forgotten their hoodie. Maybe the note was just some kind of prank. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. The words on the note felt personal, like someone had been watching me for a long time. Back in my apartment, I locked the door and double-checked the windows. I sat on the couch, trying to calm myself, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had lived in the building for over a year, and I had never felt unsafe before. But now every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside my window seemed to be a threat. I kept imagining someone lurking in the hallways, watching me through the cracks in the door. The next morning, I decided to confront the situation. I returned to the laundry room to see if there were any clues I had missed. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find, but I couldn't just ignore it. When I got to the basement, the laundry room was empty, as expected. The hoodie was gone. The space felt exactly the same as it had before, but the absence of the clothing made it feel even more eerie. The washer and dryer hummed quietly in the background, and the faint flickering of the lights made the room feel colder. I walked around the room, looking for anything that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing. No sign of who had been there, no trace of the person who had left the hoodie. It was as if the whole thing had been a figment of my imagination. But I knew it wasn't. I knew what I had seen, and I knew that the note had been real. I had felt it in my bones. Someone had been in that room, and they had been watching me. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every time I passed the laundry room, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there. I couldn't stop thinking about the note, about how it had felt so personal. Who had written it? Who had left the hoodie behind? I never saw the hoodie again, and I never found another note. But the feeling of being watched never left me. It was a quiet afternoon when I decided to finally talk to the building manager. I didn't know what I expected them to say, but I needed to ask. I walked into the office, and after a few minutes of small talk, I brought up the incident. The manager's face changed when I mentioned the note. "You're not the first one," they said, their voice barely above a whisper. "We've had a few strange reports from tenants in the past. Things going missing, odd noises. It's always been unsettling, but no one's ever really talked about it openly." I left the office with more questions than answers. The building, once a quiet, safe place, now felt like a prison. I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for the next opportunity to make their presence known. And as the days passed, I couldn't help but wonder just how long they had been watching and what they wanted from me. Story 22. It was a quiet morning when I found the package at my door. I hadn't been expecting anything, and the package didn't have any markings or return address to identify where it had come from. It was a plain, brown box sealed with tape, and it looked unremarkable at first glance. But the feeling of unease crept over me as I picked it up, wondering who would send something without any explanation. I carried the box inside, setting it down on the kitchen counter. The air felt thicker somehow, as if the walls were closing in around me. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface of the box, the uncertainty gnawing at me. The label was simple, just my name and address, nothing more. No phone number, no sender's information. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was probably just a mistake or a delivery error. Curiosity got the best of me, and I grabbed a knife to carefully cut open the tape. The moment I opened the box, I was met with a chill, as if the contents had been waiting for me. Inside, there was nothing but a single, old-fashioned key. It was small, silver, and looked like it belonged to an antique lock. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt an odd sense of dread wash over me. What was this key for? I had no idea, and it made my stomach twist. Beneath the key, there was a folded piece of paper. I hesitated for a moment before unfolding it, feeling the weight of the situation settle on my shoulders. The note was simple, written in bold, messy handwriting, "You're next." My hands went cold as I read the words, the meaning of them sinking in. Who could have sent this, and why? The note offered no answers, only a sense of foreboding. I stood there for a long time, staring at the key and the note, my mind racing with possibilities. The key could be for anything, but why was it addressed to me? And why now? The words "you're next" haunted me, repeating in my mind like an ominous drumbeat. I felt as though something terrible was about to happen. though I couldn't say what it was. My instinct screamed at me to be careful, to stay alert, but I didn't know where to start. I looked at the key again, turning it over in my hand. There was nothing special about it, no markings or engravings that might indicate what it unlocked. It could be a key to a locker, a door, or even a mailbox. The possibilities were endless, but none of them felt right. I couldn't shake the feeling that this key was meant for something far more significant, something I wasn't yet ready to face. I tried to distract myself, putting the key and note aside and going about my day. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that clung to me. Every creak of the house, every passing car outside seemed amplified, as if the world was closing in around me. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing there, watching me. The more I thought about the note, the more I realized that I couldn't ignore it. I had to find out what it meant. That night I couldn't sleep. The key and the note kept running through my mind, spinning in a never-ending loop. I kept thinking about the words, "You're next." Who was I supposed to be afraid of? What was I next in line for? The possibilities were endless, each one more terrifying than the last. I found myself standing at the window, staring out into the darkness, feeling a strange sense of dread creeping up my spine. The next day, I decided to investigate. I had to know what the key opened, and I couldn't rest until I found out. I drove around the neighborhood, looking for anything that might match the key. I checked the old abandoned house on the corner, the one everyone said was haunted. But the key didn't fit any of the locks there. I tried other places, storage units, abandoned cars, but none of them yielded any answers. The more I searched, the more frustrated I became. The key was taunting me, slipping through my fingers like a bad dream. As the day wore on, I started to feel like I was being followed. I'd catch glimpses of someone watching me from a distance, just out of sight. But whenever I turned to look, no one was there. My heart raced, and I felt a chill in the air, like something was just beyond my reach, waiting for me to make a mistake. I couldn't shake the feeling that the person who had sent the package was watching my every move, waiting for me to unravel the mystery they had created. I returned home in the late afternoon, exhausted and on edge. I locked the doors behind me and sank into a chair, staring at the key on the table. It seemed so ordinary, yet I knew it held the answers to something far darker than I could imagine. I ran my fingers over it again, hoping for some kind of revelation. And then, just as I was about to give up, something strange happened. The key began to glow faintly, its silver surface shimmering in the dim light of the room. I jumped back in surprise, my breath catching in my throat. The key's glow faded almost immediately, leaving me wondering if I had imagined it. But when I picked it up again, it felt different, heavier, somehow as if it had gained some kind of power. I had no idea what to do with it, but I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to find out what it opened, and I had to do it soon. As night fell, I stood by the door, the key in my hand, the words "You're next" echoing in my mind. I didn't know who had sent the package or why, but I was certain that whatever waited for me was just around the corner. I took a deep breath, my hand shaking as I reached for the door. Something was coming, and I was about to find out what it was. Story 23. The old man who lived across the street had been giving me strange looks for weeks, but I never thought much of it until I found a letter in my mailbox with no return address. At first I thought it might be a mistake, some random piece of mail that had ended up in the wrong box. But as I picked it up, I noticed the handwriting on the envelope was uneven, jagged, almost frantic. A chill ran down my spine as I wondered who could have sent it, especially with no name or return address. I brought the letter inside, my hands trembling slightly as I carefully opened it. The paper inside was yellowed and brittle, as if it had been sitting around for years. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the messy handwriting. The letter was short, just a few sentences, but they made my stomach twist with unease. "I see you. I've been watching. Don't try to leave." I stood frozen, staring at the words, trying to make sense of them. Who would write something like this? And why? My mind raced, trying to figure out who might have sent it, but no answers came. The old man across the street had always been a bit of a recluse, never really interacting with anyone. He lived alone in the old house, the one that had been there for as long as I could remember. It seemed like everyone in the neighborhood had their suspicions about him, but no one had ever voiced them out loud. The strange looks he'd been giving me suddenly made sense in a way that sent a shiver through me. Had he been watching me all this time? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just some odd prank, but the words on the paper kept echoing in my mind. Don't try to leave. What did that mean? And why would he write it to me? The next day, I kept my eyes on the old man's house, half expecting to see him peering out from behind his curtains. I didn't see him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching. I tried to go about my day, but everything felt off. The simple act of going to the grocery store felt like a mission, as if something was waiting to happen. Every car that drove by seemed to slow down, every passerby felt like they were paying too much attention. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I passed the old man's house, I glanced over at the front window. There he was, standing motionless, staring at me. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, and his face was unreadable. My heart raced as I quickly looked away, my pace quickening. I didn't know if he had seen me notice him, but the unease settled deeper in my chest. I couldn't tell anyone about the letter. Who would believe me? It sounded so absurd, like something out of a horror movie. But I couldn't ignore the strange sense of dread that followed me wherever I went. The letter, his eyes, the way he always seemed to be just a little too close, it all felt like a warning. That night I stayed up late, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. I had to know more about the old man. Maybe he had done something like this before. I grabbed my phone and did a quick search on the neighborhood forum, looking for any clues. There were a few comments here and there, but nothing concrete. Someone mentioned he had been a hermit for years, living in that house since the 1960s. Others claimed he was harmless, just eccentric, but nothing that would explain the letter. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had to find out what he wanted. I decided to go over there, knock on his door, and ask him directly. It was a stupid idea, I knew that, but the curiosity and fear gnawed at me. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I needed to face it head on. I couldn't let this strange situation control my life any longer. The next morning I walked across the street, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood in front of his house, staring at the weathered door, unsure if I should knock. I took a deep breath and raised my hand, hesitating just before I knocked. Before I could bring my fist down, the door creaked open, and there he was standing in the doorway, his eyes locked on mine. He didn't say anything, just stared at me, and for a moment, I wondered if I had made a huge mistake. Can I help you?" he asked in a voice that sounded almost too calm, too detached. I didn't know how to respond. My mouth went dry as I struggled to find the right words. I got a letter from you," I said, finally managing to speak. His expression didn't change, but I could feel the weight of his gaze. "I didn't send you anything," he replied, his voice flat. "Maybe you're mistaken." My stomach dropped. I could feel my heart beating louder in my ears. The letter had come from his house. There was no mistake. I tried to say something else, but the words stuck in my throat. He stared at me for a few seconds longer, then slowly closed the door without another word. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. I had expected something, some sort of explanation, but all I got was a cold dismissal. I walked back to my house, my mind spinning. It didn't make sense. If he hadn't sent the letter, then who had? And why did he seem so calm, as if nothing was wrong? That night I sat by my window, watching the old man's house. The lights were off, and everything seemed still. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw him again standing in the window, watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The letter, his stare, the strange sense of unease, it was all connected. But to what end? And what did it mean for me? Story 24. I went on a camping trip with friends, but I woke up in the middle of the night to someone whispering my name outside the tent. The sound was soft at first, like a breath carried on the wind, but it was unmistakable. My name. It was so clear, so familiar. Yet there was an eerie quality to it, as though the person speaking was just inches away. I sat up, my heart pounding, and strained my ears to listen. I looked around the tent, the dim light from the campfire still flickering in the distance, casting long shadows. My friends were all sound asleep, their steady breathing the only other sound in the night. I reached over to shake one of them awake, but as my hand hovered over her shoulder, I hesitated. The whispering continued, a soft repetition of my name, like a lullaby meant to pull me from the safety of my tent. My pulse quickened, and I pulled the zipper of the tent open just a little, peering out into the dark woods. The forest seemed still, but the air felt thick with something I couldn't quite place. The whispering had stopped, and all I could hear was the rustling of the leaves in the breeze. My eyes darted around, searching for any movement in the darkness, but I saw nothing. I closed the zipper slowly, trying not to wake my friends, but my mind was racing. I lay back down, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it. It had to have been the wind or some strange trick of the mind. But deep down, I knew that what I had heard was real. It wasn't just a random sound, it was as if someone had been standing right outside, waiting for me to hear them. I pulled the sleeping bag tighter around me, hoping the warmth would calm my nerves, but sleep wouldn't come. The silence outside the tent felt oppressive, as though something was watching, waiting. The next morning, I told my friends what had happened. They all laughed it off, brushing it aside as a product of an overactive imagination. "You were probably just dreaming," one of them said, stretching as they packed up their gear. I wanted to believe them, but something in my gut told me that I hadn't imagined it. The whispering had been too real, too deliberate. As the day went on, I tried to push the memory of the whispering out of my mind. We hiked through the woods, laughing and joking as we went, but every time I looked around, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. The woods seemed endless, and the trees loomed above us like silent sentinels, their branches swaying in the wind. Every so often I would catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing there. That night, as we sat around the campfire, the air grew colder, and the sky darkened with clouds. We cooked our dinner, the smell of roasting marshmallows and sizzling meat filling the air. But I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. I kept glancing toward the woods, half expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us. My friends noticed my discomfort and teased me about being paranoid, but I couldn't laugh along with them. Something wasn't right. When it came time to go to bed, I hesitated at the entrance of the tent. I wanted to sleep, to forget the feeling that had been gnawing at me all day, but the thought of hearing that whisper again made my skin crawl. I crawled into the tent, my friends already settled inside, and zipped it up tightly. The sound of the wind outside was calming, but the memories of the whispering voice still echoed in my mind. As I lay there, trying to sleep, the same whispering sound returned. This time it was louder, clearer, as if the person outside the tent was standing just inches from me. My heart skipped a beat as the voice called my name again, its tone soft but insistent. I sat up quickly, my breath catching in my throat, but I didn't want to wake my friends. I tried to keep my voice steady as I whispered to them, "Did you hear that?" One of them stirred and mumbled, "What are you talking about?" But they didn't wake up. I was alone in my fear, my mind racing with the thought that something or someone was outside waiting. I glanced toward the tent flap, my eyes wide with terror. The whispering continued, the voice repeating my name in a way that sent a chill through me. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, listening as the whispering grew louder, closer, until it felt like the person was right outside the tent. My breath was shallow, my chest tight with fear. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that it was just the wind, or maybe an animal, but the voice sounded too human, too familiar. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was even worse, the suffocating stillness that pressed in on me from all sides. I waited, holding my breath, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no sounds of movement, just the quiet of the night. My friends remained sound asleep, unaware of the terror that had taken hold of me. I lay back down, my heart still racing, unable to sleep. I stared at the ceiling of the tent, my mind spinning with fear and confusion. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and sleeplessness. The whispering never returned, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there, watching me. The next morning, I didn't tell my friends about the second incident. They were already dismissing my previous experience as a figment of my imagination, and I didn't want to seem crazy. But the unease never left me. The woods felt different now, as though they held a secret, something I wasn't meant to understand. The whispering voice had been a warning, a sign that something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what. All I knew was that I wasn't alone in those woods, and whatever had whispered my name would be waiting for me, even if I never heard it again. Story 25. It was late at night, and I was driving home after a long day of work. I had been on the road for hours, the familiar highway stretching out before me, when I saw the signs for road work up ahead. I sighed, knowing I'd have to take a detour. I had no idea where the alternate route would take me, but it didn't seem like a big deal. I was used to the occasional detour, especially when it was this late and there were few other cars on the road. The detour led me down a narrow, deserted street that I had never seen before. It was the kind of place where streetlights were few and far between, and the trees along the sides of the road created dark, shadowy silhouettes. The further I drove, the more isolated it felt. There were no houses, no businesses, just the endless stretch of pavement and the occasional flicker of a streetlight far ahead. It was the kind of road that made you wonder why anyone would ever use it, especially at this hour. As I drove on, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A car had pulled onto the same road, and it was behind me, staying a few hundred feet back. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they were also taking the detour or just driving through the area. But the car didn't pass me. It stayed behind me, matching my speed, mile after mile. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that started creeping up my spine. The road ahead seemed endless, and the car continued to follow me without ever attempting to pass. At first, I thought it was just another driver, perhaps heading in the same direction. But as the minutes stretched on, I began to feel more uncomfortable. The car's headlights seemed to shine a little too brightly in my rearview mirror, and the closer it stayed, the more it felt like I was being hunted rather than just followed. I checked the rear view again and saw that the car was still there, right behind me, unwavering. I made a few turns, hoping to lose them, but the car remained right on my tail. Each time I turned, it turned too. I sped up, hoping to get some distance, but the car stayed right there, maintaining the same distance between us. It was almost as if they were purposely matching my speed, as though they knew exactly what I was doing. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence, that it was all in my head, but the tension in my chest grew with every passing minute. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, 1:30 a.m. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and the car's headlights burned into my vision. My palms were starting to sweat, and my heart was racing. I thought about pulling over and asking the driver what they wanted, but I wasn't sure I wanted to get that close. Something about the situation felt wrong, and I wasn't sure how to get out of it. The car behind me didn't seem to be in any hurry, just calmly following along. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that maybe they were just going the same way, that it was nothing. But the longer the car stayed behind me, the more my anxiety grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was as though the driver had no intention of passing me or even getting ahead. They just wanted to stay with me, like a shadow in the night. I decided to try something bold. I slowed down, hoping the car would pass me, but it didn't. Instead, it slowed down too, maintaining the same distance between us. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, and my breath quickened. This wasn't normal. I didn't know who was in that car, but I had a sinking feeling that they weren't just another driver. They were following me, deliberately. I turned again, this time down an even narrower road, hoping that the change in direction would throw them off. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, the headlights were still there, as steady and constant as before. They had followed me down this road, too. The isolation of the street seemed to intensify the unease that was settling in my gut. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the hum of my engine and the sound of the other car's tires on the asphalt. I started to panic. My thoughts were racing, and I couldn't think clearly. I knew I needed to get to a more populated area, but I had no idea how far I was from the nearest town. I kept my eyes glued to the road ahead, barely daring to glance in the rearview mirror again. The car was still there, right behind me. I felt trapped, like there was no way out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a sign for a gas station up ahead. It was small and run down, but it was something. I made a sharp turn into the parking lot, hoping the other car would keep going. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, the headlights were still there, slowly turning into the parking lot behind me. I pulled into a spot and stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. The car followed me all the way in, coming to a stop behind mine. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to call the police, but just as I picked it up, the other car's headlights blinked off. The driver's side door opened, and I watched as a figure stepped out, moving slowly toward my car. I couldn't make out their face in the darkness, but the silhouette was unmistakable. My fear hit a peak as I realized that this was no coincidence. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I slammed the car into drive and sped out of the parking lot, my heart in my throat. The car didn't follow me this time, and I didn't dare look back to see if it was still there. I kept driving, taking the most direct route back to familiar roads, not stopping until I was safely back in the heart of the city. I didn't know who that driver was or what they wanted, but I knew I would never take that detour again. Story 26. I couldn't figure out why the dog kept growling at the door every night, until one evening I came home and noticed that someone had been sitting on my porch when I wasn't there. It wasn't just the usual scratching or barking. There was a low, menacing growl that sent a chill through the air each time the sun set. At first I thought it was the wind or maybe an animal, but as the days passed, the growls grew louder, more persistent. The dog, usually so calm, would stare at the door with unblinking eyes, as if it were waiting for something to happen. I decided to ignore it at first, thinking it was just a phase or some random disturbance. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. There were no sounds of other animals around, no sign of anything that could be causing the dog to react like this. The growling didn't stop even when I tried to reassure him, and it felt as if something or someone was out there, just beyond the door. Every night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the growls would start again, growing louder until I could barely sleep. One evening I decided to come home early to see if I could catch whatever was causing the disturbance. As I pulled into the driveway, I immediately noticed something off. The porch light was on, casting long shadows across the steps. It wasn't unusual for the light to flicker sometimes, but tonight it seemed brighter, almost too bright. I didn't think much of it, but when I stepped out of the car, I felt an unsettling stillness in the air, like the whole world had paused just for a moment. I opened the front door cautiously, but before I could even take a step inside, the dog started barking furiously, charging toward the door with wild abandon. He was practically trembling with anxiety, and his eyes were fixed on the floor near the door. That's when I saw the faint outline of something on the porch. It was subtle at first, just a slight indentation in the chair cushion. Someone had been sitting there, but they were gone now. I stepped outside, my heart racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The chair on the porch, which had been neatly placed earlier that morning, was now crooked, as if someone had been sitting there for a long time. There was an imprint in the cushion where someone's weight had been, and the air around it felt heavier, as though it had absorbed the presence of whoever had been there. The dog's growling intensified, but he wouldn't come any closer to the porch. I walked slowly toward the chair, my eyes scanning the surroundings. The porch was empty now, but the unsettling feeling lingered in the air. The smell of cigarette smoke was faint but unmistakable, even though I hadn't seen anyone around. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone been watching me? Was I being stalked? I had no idea who it could have been, but the evidence was clear someone had been sitting there, waiting for me to return. I knelt down to inspect the ground, hoping to find some clue, but all I found were a few small pieces of dirt scattered across the porch. The wind had kicked up, blowing the remnants of whatever footprints might have been there. My thoughts were interrupted by a loud noise from inside the house. The dog had stopped growling, but now he was whimpering, pacing nervously by the door. I rushed inside, my mind still on the figure who had been sitting on my porch. The house felt colder than usual, the air thick with an unfamiliar tension. I locked the door behind me and stood still for a moment, listening for any signs of movement. There was nothing, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few days I kept an eye on the porch, but the presence seemed to vanish as suddenly as it had appeared. The dog stopped growling at the door, but his unease lingered. He would occasionally glance toward the porch, his eyes darting nervously, but he never barked again. It was as if whatever had been there had simply disappeared, leaving behind only the lingering sense of being watched. I decided to stay alert, installing a small security camera near the porch to capture anything unusual. The next few nights passed without incident, but the sense of unease never fully left me. Every time I walked past the door, I found myself glancing at the porch, half expecting to see someone sitting there, watching me. But nothing ever happened. Then, one evening, I decided to go through the footage on the camera. I was hoping to find some explanation, anything that could shed light on what had been happening. As I scrubbed through the recordings, I paused when I saw something strange. The camera had captured the faintest movement, a shadow passing in front of the porch light, but it wasn't clear who or what it was. The shadow seemed to hover for a moment, and then it was gone. The camera hadn't picked up any sounds, no footsteps or rustling. It was as if whatever had been there had moved without making a sound. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. The shadow had looked too solid to be a trick of the light, yet it had vanished without a trace. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been sitting on my porch was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to return. The dog's growling had stopped, but the unease in my gut told me that the danger wasn't over. Whoever or whatever had been on my porch was still somewhere nearby, just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. Story 27. It was a normal Tuesday when the package arrived. I had just come home from work and was unloading my things when I noticed a small, unmarked box sitting on my doorstep. There was no return address, no postage, just my name written in block letters across the top. At first, I thought it might have been a mistake or perhaps something I had ordered online that I'd forgotten about. But when I picked it up, it felt heavier than I expected, like it contained something solid. Curious, I brought the package inside and set it down on the kitchen counter. The air in the room felt strangely still as I grabbed a knife to carefully open the box. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, but as I cut through the tape, a strange feeling crept over me, a sense that something wasn't quite right. The contents inside were wrapped in brown paper, and as I pulled it away, I found a photograph. The photo was of me taken from my own backyard. I stared at it, my mind racing. It was a clear shot, showing me standing in the kitchen, my back turned as I fiddled with the stove. I hadn't heard anything outside, and I certainly hadn't seen anyone. The photo was so crisp and detailed, it felt as though someone had been standing just beyond the window, watching me. I looked around the kitchen, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. I felt a chill run down my spine as I held the photograph in my hands. My first instinct was to dismiss it as a prank, but the more I looked at it, the more unsettling it became. The angle was too perfect, as if the person who took the photo had been standing in my backyard, positioned just far enough to stay out of sight but close enough to capture such a detailed image. I felt a sudden wave of nausea, realizing that someone had been watching me, someone who knew exactly what I was doing, even though I hadn't seen or heard a thing. I turned the photo over, hoping for some clue, some explanation, but the back was blank. There was no note, no message, nothing to indicate who had sent it or why. My mind began to race with possibilities. Was it someone I knew? A stalker? Or was it just some random stranger with access to my property? I glanced out the window toward the backyard, but it was empty, the evening light casting long shadows over the grass. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how vulnerable I had been. I had been completely unaware of the person in my yard, quietly observing me through the window. My thoughts turned to my neighbors, wondering if any of them had seen anything unusual. But no, I had never noticed anyone lingering outside, no strange cars or unfamiliar faces. The idea that someone could have been so close, yet I hadn't noticed, was both terrifying and infuriating. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably just a prank. Maybe it was someone playing a sick joke, or maybe the photo had been taken months ago and was only just sent to me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The photo felt recent, the details too sharp and clear for it to have been taken long ago. I couldn't stop the thoughts from swirling in my mind, each one darker than the last. I decided to call the police. It was the logical thing to do, I told myself, but as I dialed the number, I hesitated. What would I even say? Someone sent me a photo of me in my own kitchen. How could I explain something so bizarre, so unsettling? The officer on the other end listened patiently as I explained the situation, and after a long pause, he told me to hold on to the photo and to keep an eye out for any suspicious activity. He also suggested I install a security camera in the backyard, which seemed like a good idea but also made me feel like I was living in some kind of paranoid nightmare. The rest of the night passed uneasily. I couldn't shake the image of the photo, the way it seemed to capture me in such an intimate moment, unaware of the person watching from just beyond my window. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, wondering if I had noticed anything unusual that day, any odd sounds, any strange movements outside. But no, everything had seemed normal. My kitchen was where I always spent my evenings, cooking dinner, listening to music, lost in my thoughts. How could someone have gotten so close without me noticing? I spent the night tossing and turning, unable to get the photo out of my mind. Every creak of the house, every shift in the shadows made me jump. I checked the locks on the doors and windows several times, even though I knew they were secure. I kept the lights on in the kitchen, as though the glow would somehow keep the strange feeling at bay. The next day, I decided to take action. I went to the hardware store and bought a security camera system, installing it in the backyard. I also checked the fences, making sure there were no gaps or weaknesses that someone could exploit. I couldn't help but feel like I was being overly cautious, but after what had happened, I didn't feel safe anymore. The idea of someone being so close, watching me without my knowledge, had shattered my sense of security. Days passed, but the unease lingered. I never received another package, and nothing out of the ordinary happened, but the photo haunted me. I checked the footage from the security cameras regularly, but nothing seemed out of place. It was as though the person who had taken the photo had disappeared, leaving me with only the chilling reminder of their presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew too much about me, someone who had been watching me for longer than I realized. I wondered if the person was still out there, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The photo was a warning, I realized, a reminder that I was never truly alone. Story 28. I had lived in a small town for most of my life, where nothing ever really happened. The streets were quiet and everyone knew everyone else. It was the kind of place where you could walk down the street and greet half a dozen people on your way to the corner store. Life moved slowly, and the most exciting thing that ever happened was when the annual fair came to town. But one night, everything changed. I had just finished a late shift at the local diner, the kind of job that kept me up into the early hours of the morning. It was a typical night, and I was tired but looking forward to getting home. As I drove down the winding road leading to my house, I noticed something odd in my rearview mirror. A car had pulled out behind me, and its headlights were too bright, too close. I tried to shake the feeling off, but the car seemed to follow me no matter how many turns I made. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but as I got closer to my neighborhood, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The car stayed right behind me, maintaining the same distance as I slowed down to turn into my driveway. My heart began to race as I pulled up to my house and parked in front. I glanced in the mirror again, but the car didn't follow me up the driveway. It stopped at the end of the street and turned off its headlights. I quickly locked my car doors and rushed inside, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that lingered. It wasn't much, but something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the moment when I saw the car stop at the end of my driveway. I kept wondering if it was someone I knew or if it was just a random person passing through. But the longer I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. There was something about the way the car had followed me so closely, almost as if it had been waiting for me to turn onto my street. It didn't make sense, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning I woke up to the usual sounds of birds chirping outside my window. I went about my usual routine, making coffee and getting ready for the day. But when I stepped outside to check the weather, my stomach dropped. There, at the end of my driveway, was the same car I had seen the night before. It was parked there, just sitting quietly in the early morning light. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze in place for a moment. There was no one inside the car, no sign of movement. It was just there. I stood there, staring at the car, my mind racing. Had it been there all night? How long had it been parked there? The more I thought about it, the more questions piled up. I had never seen this car before, and I couldn't think of anyone who would have a reason to park it outside my house. The town was small, and everyone knew each other. It didn't make sense that someone would just park their car at the end of my driveway and leave it there without explanation. I took a deep breath and decided to investigate. I walked cautiously toward the car, keeping a safe distance. As I got closer, I could see that it was a plain, older model sedan. Nothing about it stood out except for the fact that it seemed completely out of place. I walked around it, hoping to find some clue as to who it belonged to, but there was nothing. No license plate number that looked familiar, no stickers or identifying marks. It was just an ordinary car parked on the side of the road, yet it felt like it didn't belong. I looked around the neighborhood, half expecting to see someone watching from behind a curtain or peeking through a window. But everything was quiet, just like it always was in this sleepy little town. No one seemed to notice the car, and no one seemed to be around. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unsure of what to do. I considered calling the police, but something held me back. It seemed so trivial, so strange. I couldn't imagine anyone would take it seriously. So, I did what anyone would do in a small town. I decided to wait and see if the car would move on its own. I spent the next few hours nervously glancing out the window, watching the car remain stationary at the end of my driveway. It was as if it was waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though there was no one around. Every time I tried to focus on something else, my eyes would inevitably drift back to the car, still parked in the same spot. It was as if it was taunting me, daring me to figure out who it belonged to and why it was there. As the day wore on, I finally decided to take action. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the car, just in case something happened. I didn't know what to do with it, but I felt like having some kind of evidence might be helpful later on. I then walked down to the end of the driveway, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, when I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. To my relief, it was just my neighbor, Mr. Harris, walking his dog. He gave me a curious look when he saw me standing there, staring at the car. "Everything okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing slightly. I nodded quickly, not wanting to sound paranoid. "Yeah, just a strange car parked here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Harris glanced at the car, then shrugged. "Probably just someone passing through. People drive through this street all the time. Nothing to worry about." But I wasn't convinced. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. I thanked Mr. Harris and went back inside, keeping an eye on the car from my window. Hours passed and the car remained parked there, unmoving. As night fell, I finally decided to call the police. I couldn't ignore it anymore. When the officer arrived, he took one look at the car and said, "It's probably just someone who broke down or got lost. We get a lot of that out here." But as he approached the car and checked the registration, his expression changed. The car didn't belong to anyone in the town. It wasn't registered at all. That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't just being watched, I was being targeted. And whoever was behind that car had been waiting for the right moment to make their move. Story 29. I was walking home after a late shift, the cool night air wrapping around me as I made my way down the familiar street. The hum of the city had faded, leaving only the distant sounds of cars passing by and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. My footsteps echoed in the quiet, and I welcomed the solitude after a long day of work. But as I approached my block, something caught my attention. A car was parked near my house, its headlights dimmed, casting a faint glow on the sidewalk. It was an unfamiliar vehicle, a dark sedan with tinted windows, sitting perfectly still. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was just someone passing through, but then I realized something unsettling. The car had been following me for the last few blocks. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine, convincing myself it was just a coincidence. But as I continued walking, I kept glancing over my shoulder, and each time the car was still there, maintaining the same distance behind me. My heart rate quickened, and I quickened my pace, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. The streets were quiet, and there was no one else around to witness what was happening. As I reached the corner, I stopped for a moment and turned to look back, hoping to get a better idea of what was going on. The car was still there, just sitting at the intersection, unmoving. It felt like the driver was watching me, waiting for something. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling of being hunted began to settle in. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I started walking faster, my pace now matching the anxiety building in my chest. I took another turn, hoping the change in direction would break the pattern. I glanced back again, and to my relief, the car was no longer behind me. It was as if it had disappeared. My breath caught in my throat as I continued walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The sudden disappearance of the car only heightened my sense of unease. Where had it gone? How could it vanish so quickly without me noticing? I turned onto my street, my mind racing. The car had followed me for several blocks, and now it was nowhere to be found. I glanced down the street, half expecting to see the headlights shining from around the corner, but there was nothing. The quietness of the night seemed even more oppressive now, and I felt the weight of the silence pressing in on me. My steps grew faster as I neared my house, but I didn't dare look behind me. As I reached the front door, I paused for a moment, my hand on the doorknob. I scanned the street one last time, but there was no sign of the car. It was gone. I quickly unlocked the door and stepped inside, locking it behind me. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and I stood there for a moment, trying to calm myself. The house felt different now, as if the air had shifted somehow. I walked to the living room, my mind still racing with questions. Why had the car followed me? Who was driving it? And why had it disappeared so suddenly? I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, even though I was alone in the house. I tried to push the thoughts aside, telling myself it was just paranoia, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. I turned on the lights in the living room, hoping the brightness would help ease my nerves. I went to the window and pulled back the curtain, peering out into the night. The street was empty, just as it had been when I arrived. I stood there for a while, watching, waiting for any sign of movement, but nothing came. The car was gone, and with it my sense of security. I couldn't help but wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it had just been another late-night driver passing by, and I had been too tired and anxious to think clearly. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the situation didn't add up. The car had followed me for blocks, staying just close enough to make me uncomfortable, but then it had disappeared without a trace. It wasn't just a coincidence, it felt deliberate. I checked my phone, hoping for some distraction, but there were no new messages, no missed calls. The silence was deafening, and I felt a strange pressure building in my chest. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, gnawing at me. The house felt empty, and I felt exposed, as if the walls were closing in on me. I knew I should go to bed, but sleep seemed impossible now. I paced around the living room, my mind running in circles. What if the car had been following me for a reason? What if the driver had been watching me for days, waiting for the right moment to make their move? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I had no idea who they were or what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure: they weren't just another random passerby. I decided to check the security cameras outside, hoping they would provide some answers. I pulled up the footage from the past few hours, my hands shaking as I scrolled through it. At first I saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual cars passing by. But as I reached the point when I had noticed the car following me, I froze. There on the screen was the dark sedan, parked right outside my house. The footage showed the car had been there for nearly half an hour before I had arrived home. It had been parked in the same spot, unmoving, until I walked up the street. The moment I turned the corner, the car had pulled away and followed me. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the truth: it hadn't disappeared at all. It had just parked out of sight, waiting for me to make the next move. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Whoever had been following me knew exactly where I lived, and they were waiting for me to make a mistake. Story 30. I had just moved into my new apartment, and everything seemed perfect. The walls were freshly painted, the floors gleamed, and the quiet neighborhood was a welcome change from the bustle of the city. I had spent the first few days unpacking and getting settled, making sure everything was in its place. The place felt like home, and for the first time in a while, I allowed myself to relax and enjoy the peace. But as the days passed, something began to feel off. At first, it was little things, minor changes that could easily be brushed off. I'd leave a mug on the kitchen counter in the morning, only to find it moved to the sink by the time I got home. My bathroom towels were always neatly folded, but occasionally one would be slightly out of place. At first, I thought it was just me being forgetful, maybe absent-mindedly moving things around without realizing it. But then the changes started to become more noticeable, more deliberate. One evening, I came home from work to find my couch cushions rearranged. I had left them in a specific order, with one cushion slightly tilted for comfort, but now they were stacked differently. The coffee table, which I always kept in front of the couch, was moved a few inches to the left. I froze in the doorway, staring at the living room, trying to make sense of it. No one else had a key to my apartment, and I was certain I had locked the door when I left that morning. Yet someone had been here, someone who knew exactly where I left things and how I liked them. The unsettling feeling only grew when I noticed my bookshelves. I had spent hours carefully arranging my books, making sure they were in perfect order. But now a few of the books were out of place. One of them, a thick novel I had just finished, was lying on the floor beside the shelf, as if someone had taken it down and then carelessly dropped it. My mind raced with questions. Had I done this myself and forgotten? But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like someone else had been in my space, someone who had taken the time to rearrange things with a purpose. The next day I decided to leave work early, hoping to catch whoever was responsible for these odd occurrences. I was nervous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in my own home. As I approached the door, I checked the lock. It was still secure. I stepped inside, carefully looking around. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My keys, which I always left on the kitchen counter, were now sitting on the living room table. I didn't remember moving them, and I certainly hadn't left them there. I felt a chill run down my spine as I walked over to the table, picking them up with trembling hands. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze of anxiety, constantly checking the locks on my doors and windows, feeling like I was being watched. The sense of being violated was overwhelming. Someone had been inside my apartment, and they knew my routine. They knew when I left for work, and when I came home. I tried to reassure myself that it could just be a coincidence, that maybe I had simply forgotten moving things around, but deep down I knew that wasn't the case. Someone was in my apartment when I wasn't there. The next few days were a blur of unease. I became hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in the building. I began to wonder if anyone else had noticed anything strange. I casually asked a neighbor if they had seen anything unusual, but they hadn't. They didn't seem concerned at all. It only made me feel more isolated, like I was the only one experiencing these strange events. I tried to go about my normal routine, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Every time I stepped into my apartment, it felt like someone was just out of sight, lurking in the shadows. I decided to install a small security camera in my living room, hoping it would give me some peace of mind. It wasn't much, just a simple camera I could connect to my phone. The next morning I left for work as usual, making sure to lock the door behind me. When I returned later that evening, I immediately checked the footage. What I saw made my stomach drop. The camera had captured a figure moving through my apartment while I was gone. It wasn't clear who it was, but it was unmistakable. Someone had been in my home. I watched the footage over and over, trying to make sense of it. The figure was quick, moving from room to room, never staying in one place for long. It was hard to tell if they were deliberately searching for something or just looking for an opportunity to snoop. They never seemed to take anything, but they definitely moved things around. I couldn't shake the feeling that this person was getting bolder, that they were becoming more comfortable with the idea of invading my space. The next night I decided to stay home and wait, determined to catch whoever it was in the act. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, watching the camera feed on my phone. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I was beginning to wonder if I had imagined everything, but then, just as I was about to give up, I saw a shadow crossing the hallway. My heart skipped a beat as I watched the figure move through the apartment, just like in the video. This time I could see them more clearly. They were wearing a dark hoodie, their face hidden in the shadows. I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained everything. When they arrived, I showed them the footage, and they agreed that something wasn't right. They searched the apartment but found no signs of forced entry. It was as if the person had been able to get in without leaving a trace. The police couldn't do much without concrete evidence, but they promised to keep an eye on the building. As the days passed, the feeling of unease didn't go away. I continued to lock every door and window before leaving for work, but it didn't help. Whoever was watching me seemed to know exactly when I was gone and when I was home. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was never truly alone. Someone was in my apartment, and they knew everything about me.